Ah, j'aurais plus de lumière. Bon, ça va, c'est bon, c'est bon. Voilà.
Mesdames et messieurs, bonsoir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please be seated. Please mute your telephones. Please don't take any pictures using your flash. We remind you that this European Night of Ideas is going to be broadcasted live as of 8 o'clock tonight.
Bonsoir, bonsoir à tous et à toutes.
Good evening to all of you and welcome at Collège de France. Is this Marguerite de Navarre and for theatre for this European Night of Ideas organized by Collège de France, the French Institute, ARTE, in cooperation with the Jacques Delors Institute. You can follow us in English on the YouTube ARTE site and or in French on ARTE's YouTube channel. As France started chairing the Council of the EU as of January, as our continent is struck by the war in Ukraine, Europe is at the heart of our debate. So it's become urgent tonight to start a debate, to listen to young people from all member states of the EU about challenges that our society is faced with. This is what we are going to do tonight. So you will listen to 50 European citizens aged 18 to 26, and they have ambitions for Europe. after 6 months of work, these young people who are very much committed will share with us their proposals for the future of our continent. They have 12 proposals around the environment, human rights, and the role of the EU in the world. And then, in a second time, they will debate with our guests. But before we start with their proposals, before I introduce these young people, we are very fortunate to be here at Collège de France. Thomas Romer, you are the administrator of Collège de France. Thank you for hosting us. Over to you, sir.
Monsieur le ministre de l'Europe et des Affaires.
Mr. Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs, Jean-Yves Le Drian, Mrs. Junior Minister in charge of National Education, Youth and Sports in charge of Youth and Commitment, Mrs. Sarah Alieri, dear Evan Guillenbin, chairperson of the French Institute, Mr. the Ambassador of the Netherlands, Mr. the Ambassador of Slovenia, Mr. Deputy Mayor of Paris in charge of Education and Research, dear young Europeans, ladies and gentlemen, for all of you present here at Collège de France, the room is full. There is even a second room. And welcome to all those of you following us on the ARTE documentary YouTube account.
This is a traditional way in France to open a ceremony. You have to salute a lot of people, but we are very happy that they are here. Le Collège de France est heureux d'accueillir pour la troisième fois la Nuit des Idées.
Collège de France is delighted to host the Night of Ideas, which has many stars tonight because it's under the banner of the European Union in the framework of the French presidency of the EU. Allow me to say how much Europe is more than ever our common horizon and our common fate. It's day 12 of the invasion of Ukraine, and on behalf of Collège de France, on behalf of the entire academic community, I want to express our total solidarity to the Ukrainian people who are experiencing a tragedy. Collège de France is making an effort within the context of the PAUSE program, which is a program to host scientists. And we have a system in place to host Ukrainian scientists who will be refugees. And soon we will have to host Russian scientists who oppose the current regime. As you know, this program has been supported by Collège de France since its inception in 2017, and we are very proud of doing so. The French presidency of the European Union is an additional opportunity to mobilize all energies to secure the academic community and more widely to secure peace. Collège de France is delighted to host this European event, and this for many reasons. The first one is connected to the very essence of this institution. Collège de France, true to its tradition, has always shown its commitment in favor of the European dimension of culture, research, and dissemination of knowledge. Very recently, we set up an annual chair dedicated to the invention of Europe through languages and culture. We organized our 2021 annual conference on the following topic, Reinventing Europe. And we offer various conferences about the challenges of Europe from history to geopolitics. The second reason is that within the context of the French presidency of the EU, Collège de France has initiated a debate on the future of science on our continent. We monitored the informal ministerial meeting of ministers of research on 25th of January, and on the 28th of February, we celebrated the 15th anniversary of IRC, which is the excellence of European research.
Address directly the European Youth Representative and the online audience. I would like to emphasize how, since its creation, the Collège de France was and still is deeply connected to the ideas of humanism, youth, and the idea of a Europe united in science and arts. Indeed, the Collège de France was created in 1530 by a young king, a very young king of France. François Ier was then 35 years old, following the suggestion of some humanists who wanted to teach and research in fields that were ignored by universities. They wanted to let the wind of youth and freedom of the Renaissance blow here into the academic world. And this is why today I hope that this forum will be able and will be rich with many innovative and constructive proposals addressing issues of the present and the future of young Europeans. Young citizens of Europe, we need your imagination and your creativity to usher in the Europe of tomorrow. I know how deeply you are committed to the success of this forum, aware that you represent the youth and the future of your respective countries. And I'm convinced that you have created among yourselves a community of inspiration and solidarity that will last beyond this event through many bonds of friendships and common projects. Et pour terminer, je souhaite saluer l'action de l'Institut Français,
And to
sa
finish, I'd like to pay
présidente
tribute
et
to the action
ses
of
équipes,
the French
la
Institute,
chaîne ARTE,
its
représentée
chairperson
par son
and its
directeur
team,
éditorial
the
Boris
ARTE
Vazon,
channel
nous permet de
with Boris
capter et de
Vazon,
diffuser cet événement
which allows
dans des
us
conditions exceptionnelles.
broadcasting
L'Institut
this
Jacques
event
Delors, qui a
in
soutenu les
outstanding
travaux de ce
condition.
forum.
I'd like to thank the
Et je
Jacques
remercie
Delors
également
Institute for their
chaleureusement mes
support,
collègues,
and I'd like to thank
professeur
all my colleagues,
Samantha Besson et Louis
Professor
Quintana-Moussi,
Luis
qui,
Cantanamosi
avec
and
Sébastien
Samantha
Maillard, vont
Besson,
animer le
who,
panel
along
de
with
la
Sébastien
deuxième partie.
Maillard, will moderate our panel session
Nora
during our
Amadi, qui,
second
avec le
part.
talent
And
que
of
nous
course,
connaissons,
Nora Amadi,
saura
a very
merveilleusement
talented
conduire
journalist
cette
who
soirée.
will
Je vous
beautifully
souhaite une
moderate
excellente
this
soirée,
evening.
des échanges et
So
des
I wish
discussions
you a
ouvertes et
beautiful evening with
I wish you a very
constructive
nice and exciting
talks.
evening as well as open and interesting interactions and discussions. Und ich begrüße Sie sehr herzlich im Collège de France. Ich wünsche Ihnen einen schönen, interessanten Abend mit Diskussionen, die uns weiterhelfen auf unserem Weg zur europäischen Einheit und Identität. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, merci, cher Thomas Römer, de nous accueillir
Thank
encore
you
une fois de
so
plus ce
much,
soir.
Thomas
Avec
Roma,
nous,
for
Monsieur
hosting
le
us
ministre
tonight.
de l'Europe
With
et
us,
des Affaires
Mr.
étrangères,
Minister
Jean-Yves Le
for
Drian.
Europe and
Merci
Foreign Affairs,
d'avoir pris
Jean-Yves
le
Le
temps.
Drian.
On connaît en
Thank
ce
you
moment votre emploi du
for
temps quelque
making
peu
time.
chargé,
We
si
know
je puis
that
permettre.
you have a
Donc,
very
merci
busy
une nouvelle fois
agenda at
d'avoir
the
été avec
moment.
nous.
So once
Je
again,
vous en prie,
thank
nous
you
vous
for being with us. Please join me on stage and we'll listen to you.
Madame la ministre, chère Sarah El Haïry, Madame la présidente de l'Institut Français de Paris,
President of the
chère
Institute of France
Eva
in Paris,
Nguyen-Bin, Monsieur
Eva
l'administrateur du
Nguyen-Bin,
Collège de France,
Administrator
cher
of the College of France,
Monsieur
Thomas
le directeur de
Roma,
l'Institut Jacques Delors,
Director of the
cher Sébastien Maillard,
Jacques
mesdames et
Delors
messieurs, chers amis,
Institute. Ladies and gentlemen,
ce soir, l'une des plus
this
anciennes
evening,
institutions
one of
de
the
notre
oldest institutions in our country,
J'espère que les professeurs
and I hope that the professors in the auditorium won't take this
je vais dire,
the wrong way.
une institution héritière
Obviously, this
d'une
institution
véritable tradition.
inherits a
Ce soir,
genuine
donc,
tradition.
Ce collège, vieux de
This
près de 5 siècles,
college has been around for 500
ouvre ses
years.
portes à
It's
une nouvelle
flowing,
génération de
throwing open its doors to a new
Je trouve
generation
que c'est un
of
très beau
of
symbole.
Europeans. And I think this is a fabulous symbol.
Mais il est vrai,
But
et Thomas Römer l'a
it's
rappelé,
true, and Thomas
que le collège
Roma
nous a
reminded us
invités à
of
voir
this, that the college
converger et se rencontrer
brings
depuis très
together
longtemps les
for
meilleurs
a
esprits
number of
d'Europe.
years the best minds in
Et
Europe.
je salue aussi toutes
And I
celles
pay
et tous ceux
tribute to
qui
all
nous
those
suivent sur les réseaux
who
sociaux,
follow
jeunes
us
ou moins jeunes d'ailleurs, et qui sont
remotely, the young
également
and
avec nous
the
ce
less
soir.
young, and as I say, who are with
Ce
us
qui
this
nous
evening.
rassemble,
What brings us together,
c'est que ce qu'ici on se donne tant de mal pour construire et
and
pour
what is so
transmettre,
difficult to bring
ce qui
together
nous
and to
rassemble, ce
hand
sont
on,
des idées.
what brings us together this evening are ideas, and ideas that 500 Europeans from all the member states of the EU have on Europe and for Europe. Ideas to understand our role in the world and to understand ourselves. Tangible ideas, prompt for discussion, and that we'll be talking about very late into this evening. And this is really part and parcel of this event. With Sarah El-Hairy and myself, I have the great privilege and pleasure to declare it open. And I'm particularly delighted to see you, given the fact that the health crisis prevented us organizing this of the 27th of January, that traditional date, but we've got there in the end. And this evening, I think we'd all agree to say that our European Night of Ideas has come right at the right time, because obviously this type of forum is a way to share ideas, particularly at the French Institute, but it's also an opportune moment to think and build the Europe that we wish to see. And of course, in these upheavals, and I'll be returning to that point in just a moment, in this time of upheavals, at this particular time, this type of event is particularly welcome. So my thanks to all of you, dear Europeans, for having joined the flag that we've raised and the French presidency of the European Council, which opens up, as you know, the European Year of Youth after the buffeting winds of the epidemic that has buffeted your generation, that brings your generation into the recovery and the ecological and digital transition. And speaking of the youth and speaking of the recovery, I take this opportunity to extend a warm welcome to the cohort of the summer diplomatic corps, and I'd like to pay my thanks to the French Institute and its teams. Thank you very much to the senior officials of that institution. I'd like you to pass on my thanks to all of your teams. Now, ideas count in Europe. They matter. And they count and they matter because Europe, first and foremost, is the strength of an idea that for decades have bound us together and give us a shared horizon. An idea, and of course the paradox is such that there's nothing abstract about that, because it roots us in our everyday lives within Europe. Europe is not only a historical fact, it's not a geographical area alone. We must never forget that we're Europeans primarily because we chose to be Europeans. Europe is not something that is just an observable fact. No, it is a desire to become European. And following the 9th of May 1950 Schuman Declaration, by bringing together steel and coal production, which produced an idea to change a destiny of an area that was given over to the building of weapons. And of course, through this declaration, the choice was for peace. In 1992, the Maastricht Treaty, which established European citizenry, this revolution really, which brought into stark relief the fact that we had something more than this nation state that brought us all together, namely Europe. And of course, I have no doubts that for your generation, all this may seem trivial, may seem self-evident, but with European citizenry, we gave you a political destiny worthy of a citizen. And in line, in pace with this bold European project that sees no analogue in the world. in the
qui a acquis une valeur
European
juridiquement contraignante en 2009 et qui
Charter
stipule
of
en particulier à
2000,
son article 2 que
and
nul
in
ne peut
its
être
Article
condamné
2 that nobody
à la
can
peine
be
de mort ni exécuté, mais il y a
convicted
d'autres articles.
such that
Nous
they
avons
would
fait le choix de
would
porter
suffer death.
le respect de la dignité
And
plus
we
loin
have taken
qu'aucune autre législation
adherence
au monde.
to dignity further than any
Avec les adhésions
legal boundary in the world.
de 2004,
In
de 2007
2004,
et de
2007,
2013,
and then 2013, with
qui ont
those successive
commencé
years
à réparer le temps
where we
que
tried
nous avait
to
fait perdre le rideau de fer,
restore the years
pendant
lost by the Iron
de longues
Curtain,
décennies
for
à
many
diviser notre
decades,
continent, nous avons fait le
divided
choix
our
de
continent.
la
We decided
réunification européenne, le
for
choix de nous
European
retrouver.
reunification,
m'autoriser
to come back
à ne
together.
pas employer le terme
And I
d'élargissement,
won't use the word
que je déteste,
enlargement, which I hate. I
parce
hate
qu'il
that
nomme
word
mal
because
les choses.
it's not
Ces
the
différentes
right
adhésions
word.
successives n'ont pas élargi la
The
famille
various
européenne, elles
joining
l'ont rassemblée.
joining of various countries to the EU didn't
La
enlarge, it
de l'idée d'Europe
rejoined
à bien y
Europe. So
réfléchir,
the powerhouse of Europe
définitive de l'avoir emporté sur l'idée de la
is
force,
such that it has brought
telle qu'elle avait
forward
toujours
this
pesé
idea of
sur
strength
la vie de nos pays.
because it's always
Par le réflexe
weighed
de la violence,
positively on
par
our
le règlement de nos
countries
différends, par
by
l'établissement de la
resolving
guerre, et
our,
au fond, parce qu'il faut bien
our
l'appeler
differences
de la faiblesse.
outside of the theatre of war.
Depuis le début,
Now,
en effet,
since the outset, really,
du cheminement de la construction
of this
européenne,
pathway leading
ce
to
chemin
European
est un chemin de
construction,
paix. La
this pathway has been one of
déclaration
peace, and
Schuman
the Schuman Declaration bears that out. I've just
Alors,
read out an
si
excerpt.
nous nous étions vus fin janvier,
Now, if we'd all met at the end of
comme nous
January,
l'avions initialement
as initially
prévu,
scheduled,
au nom
if
de
we'd
ceux
met
qui,
at
comme
that
moi, sont nés
juncture,
au milieu du siècle dernier,
me, who was born
j'aurais sans
in the
doute
last
rappelé
century,
à ceux qui, comme vous,
no doubt I would have
n'ont connu
reminded
que l'aurore de ce premier
you,
21e siècle,
who have been born in
combien
the 21st
la paix est
century,
précieuse.
I would remind you how
combien
precious
elle est
peace
fragile.
is and how,
Je
in
vous
fact,
aurais sans
fragile
doute
it is.
rappelé
And no
qu'en
doubt I
tant
would have reminded you
qu'Européens,
that as a
nous
European,
sommes tous les héritiers des
we are
générations
all
qui, avec la paix, ont
we all
conquis pour nous
inherit
la léguer, cet
from
option
those
du droit à vivre
who
dans la
built
liberté, la
the
sécurité
opportunity to live
et la
in peace,
prospérité.
security, and prosperity
Mais tout ça,
on the rubble of war.
désormais, vous et moi,
And you and
nous savons
I,
qu'il n'est
of
plus
course,
besoin
we
de le
all
dire.
know full well that that no longer
Parce que
possibly
tout
needs to be
cela,
said, because of
vous et
course
moi,
all
nous
that
le voyons aujourd'hui dans,
you know,
dans
we can
chaque
see
image
that
qui nous
in
parvient de
every
l'Ukraine.
picture that comes
l'agression,
from Ukraine, where
illégale,
illegal aggression,
irresponsable, injustifiable,
irresponsible,
souvent
unwarranted
coupable, la
aggression
Russie de Vladimir Poutine a ramené la
launched
guerre sur
by
notre continent.
the guilty party, Vladimir Putin,
Et
who
l'admirable
has inflamed
résistance
the
du peuple ukrainien
European
témoigne,
continent. And
elle aussi,
the
de la
torch of
force de
resistance
l'idée
of
européenne. Et de
Ukraine
quelle
has shown,
c'est pourquoi, avec
is
vous,
bringing high
je veux
and
redire ce soir
strong
aux
the
Ukrainiens
power
notre
of the European
respect,
idea. And I
notre
express
solidarité,
my
notre
every
soutien.
sentiment of
saluer,
solidarity and respect to the
l'administrateur,
to
l'engagement du Collège de France aux
Ukrainians.
côtés de scientifiques ukrainiens en danger
Now,
dans le cadre du programme PAUSE. que
In
vous
the
avez
pause
évoqué.
program, Thomas Raymer, the administrator, made
Nombreux
mention
sont
of this
les
program to
Français,
bring
les Polonais,
together
les Italiens,
to
les
the Collège
Israéliens, les
de France, the
Portugais, les Roumains, les
Ukrainians,
autres, de 20 ans,
all
qui
Europeans
soudain ont dû se
who
sentir
suddenly
viscéralement
must have felt
européens,
very much
en
European,
voyant
in
le
addition to the
président
French,
Zelensky acclamé
by
par,
seeing President
notre Parlement
Zelensky
européen alors que les chars
acclaimed by
avançaient vers Kiev
our French Parliament
et que les
while
bombes s'abattaient sur Kharkiv.
tanks were going
J'en
towards
suis convaincu.
Kiev and the
Comme je
bombs
suis
were raining
convaincu
down
que
on the
si
country. I'm convinced of
d'autres
the
en étaient
fact that
venus à
if anybody
qu'est
had
l'Europe,
forgotten what
ils se
Europe
sont souvenus ce jour-là.
is, no doubt they remembered
Au
it
fond d'eux-mêmes,
at
parce
that
que
moment,
cette
deep
scène
in their soul,
disait
because
tout
those
des fantômes de
images
notre passé,
reawakened all the
notre
ghosts of our past,
détermination à les
but
combattre.
also awakened
Parce que sans
our
équivoque, elle
resolve
disait aussi le
to
sens de nos
fight,
valeurs. Et
because
parce qu'elle
they
permettait de se
awakened
souvenir que la
the
paix
sentiment of our
devenue
feelings
réalité
and our
au sein de
values,
l'Union européenne
and
avait
that
été à
peace
l'origine
within
un
the
rêve
EU
fou, nourri par des
was a
femmes
mad
et
dream,
des hommes qui
nourished
ont
by
cru
men and
contre vents et
women
marées.
who
Cela,
fought tooth
beaucoup
and
l'avaient
nail
oublié.
for that
Et
peace.
parce
Many may have
qu'elle
forgotten.
disait clairement
And
pourquoi il nous faut, face au retour
they
du
said,
pire,
given
agir
the fact
en
that the
Européens.
worst has come, why cannot we fight it?
Alors,
We
agir
can
en
fight it as
Européens,
Europeans. So
face au retour du
acting
pire,
as
nous le
Europeans
pouvons
with this
et nous le
horror
faisons.
in our face, we can fight and we do
Car,
fight
dans le monde
for
d'aujourd'hui,
Europe. Because in the world
cette
such as it
idée
is
européenne
today,
est
this
également
idea
une
of
puissance.
Europe is also a source of strength.
trop longtemps, c'est un sujet qui
Too long, I
va
would
nous
say,
dire beaucoup, ce que je vais vous dire.
um,
Trop longtemps, notre Europe s'est
our
méfiée
Europe has
du sérieux
been
de la
cautious
puissance géopolitique
of
qu'elle
the
porte en elle. Parce que
geopolitical
il y a des raisons.
power that Europe
Les
has.
puissances des
There are
nationalismes
reasons behind this, because
l'avaient amené l'Europe
nationalism had brought Europe on the brink. Because Europe, it must be said, Europe had decided to build itself against the primacy of brute force and with a certain understanding of strength associated with its project. And of course, it had been buffeted considerably in the 20th century Europe. But as years have gone by, and this is very recent, and I'm well placed to tell you about this because I was there, we are opening our eyes increasingly on a world which is becoming harder, more brutal. And maybe we feel that we're sheltered from the rest of the world. And our Europe, little by little, has understood that Europe needs to get rid of the sense of being overly cautious. We need to know who we are. We need to decide at last that we need to use a strategic usage of our fabulous trump cards that we have in our hand and say that these are levers that can be pulled to weigh positively on the world. We have 450 million consumers in our market, an ability to innovate, a standard-producing arena. This is what we saw in the digital arena recently. We all know that we've got that we are the biggest financial sponsor of public aid for building a fairer, more just world. Our academic, our cultural knowledge as well. And of course, all this revolves around leading possibly to a European defense. And European defense over the recent years has been reinforced, whereas the concept itself of European defense only a few years ago raised perplexity. And in some areas, or in some countries, it raised certain disapproval. I mean, I remember 10 years, for 10 years, I had provided considerable support for working for European defense. Of course, let's be clear, for our Europe, we're not talking about being a brutal and cynical position for creating rivalry and competition. No, we need to think about our own way forward. Just as we've made inroads in the past towards peace, we need to make sure that if we need to lock horns, then we lock horns in order to defend our fundamental principles, democracy, the cardinal values of freedom, to defend a very specific model, but towards universalism, a new cradle of humanism in the face of the buffeting winds of this century, under the overarching principles of progress built on law and reciprocal obligations from one state to another, multilateralism, dialogue in the diplomatic field, a dialogue for furthering the world. And the pandemic also was an accelerator in this realm. That's where we stood. If we had met up on the 27th of January, that's what we'd have seen. But in space of a few weeks, because we are determined to make sure that we can do everything we can to put an end to this war that has been foisted upon us by Vladimir Putin, to put an end to the suffering of the 44 million Ukrainians under his boot. We've just crossed another threshold towards European defense. Collectively, we've decided to support the Ukrainian government by delivering military equipment, defensive military equipment, which breaks European taboo, it must be said. In tight conjunction with our allies, in record time, in the space of a few hours, we've adopted massive sanctions against Vladimir Putin in order to make the cost of his war unbearable, insupportable. And I would say that we are going to step up this effort, particularly in light of what happened yesterday, given the rise of the indiscriminate criminal shelling that are striking Ukrainian civilians and plunging them in the darkest, unacceptable depths of terror. In our union, we have organized to meet this massive tragedy and the exodus that it's precipitated. We are offering support. There were blockages and impasses recently, but in the space of a few hours, things have been resolved. In Versailles, our head of state and government has just laid the first milestones towards a historic decision that we'll be taking before the end of the summer to make more tangible European sovereignty in energy, in defense, and in the economy. But European sovereignty, that particular word, when the French president made his speech, I have to include the Sorbonne. Sorry, I do apologize for doing that. I know in the Collège de France it's sort of the Sorbonne. But anyway, there is a kind of a convergence there, I think, a convergence of commitments, if you will. But in the Sorbonne speech made by the French president, when the word was used, sovereignty, nobody really believed it. But, here we are today. Some, very recently, spoke of Europe as a geopolitical dwarf, a dwarf who doesn't dare say who he is and doesn't stand up to the plate. But I think we need to say today that nobody would dare say that now. And Europe is now moving with giant strides, if I continue with that metaphor, and it's just the beginning. The strength and the birth of the European idea, in my view, at the end of the day, means that it can accomplish what may seem as not feasible. Europe was caught in massive wars between France and Germany, bringing together massive diversity, bringing 27 countries around a freely consented foundation, making Europe more tangible, more concrete, and now to have accomplished a quantum leap in geopolitics to try and stop an unwarranted and terrible war. So this conviction, I wanted to share this with you this evening. Sarah will take over from where I leave off before we move on to the tutorial per se. Of course, we're not going to leave it at this. But I wanted to say what I said, to really urge you to be as audacious as Danton said. And with that, the future of Europe will be yours. There you are, dear friends. That's the message I wanted to get across to you this evening. The message of European audaciousness renewed for the generation that you are, faced with the tragic avatars of history. But also, let's be careful, because as the tragic events that we're seeing in Ukraine, Europe that carries the promise of peace in its bosom will never be fully put to bed. We need to protect our values as European citizens. We always need to fight for it, as Husserl said, as a good European who is not frightened of any infinite fight. Thank you very much.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Minister. I'm certain this message of audacity will be well received by the young people in this room, because the ideas they're going to share with you are full of audacity. Sarah El Haïry, you are Junior Minister in charge of youth and commitment. You have the floor, ma'am.
Monsieur le ministre,
Minister
de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères,
in charge of Europe and
Madame la présidente de
Foreign
l'Institut
Affairs,
Français,
dear Jean-Yves, Mrs. President of the French Institute, Mr. the Administrator of Collège de France, Mr. President of the Jacques Delors Institute, dear representative from ARTE, my dear European friends. Tonight, there is a light shining, a special light, but a light that we need. The light of audacity, the audacity of believing in the power of words, the power of values, the power of commitment. This amphitheatre is absolutely packed. 400 of you are present here. If you come from one of the 27 member states, whether you come from Paris or from elsewhere, it means because you have faith in the fact that words have an impact and that they can transform things. So we are fortunate, but we have a responsibility because we are living through a historic period. It's the French presidency of the EU, but it's also a moment where everything that we considered as guaranteed. I was born after the fall of the Berlin Wall. When I was born, peace was considered as something that was to be taken for granted. And everybody thought that war would be absurd. However, today, your generation, my generation, we realize that we have to fight for crucial ideas, education to peace, education to democracy, which we've taken for granted in our states. We support that because that's our value, but at the end of the day, if I were taking a few minutes, as tonight we are celebrating this European Night of Ideas, but let me focus on France for a second. There is one word which would be anti-democracy, and that word would be to abstain, to not go and vote. Not voting is voting against democracy. With your work, you are going to offer solutions to face the major challenges ahead of us in Europe and everywhere in the world. As you said, Mr. Minister, some people were even saying that our union, our Europe of hope, was considered by some as a dwarf. But in reality, that's a giant. That's a driving force. It's a giant because of your commitment, but only if each and every one of you puts all their hope, all their beliefs. It's only true if this Europe makes our connections alive, because what we share, our values and our future, our tomorrow, is conditioned to our actions. Actions that the French presidency of the EU is going to make non-revocable. We believe that if youth are not at the heart of institutions, or not at the heart of the decision-making process, then we will not take the right heading. We won't sail the right fare. So that's why for all meetings of Ministry of Youth, each minister comes with a representative from their country in order to be an ambassador of youth, but also to demonstrate the importance of our ability to build something in common, to achieve consensus. So the challenges ahead of us today and the solutions that you will be offering, I'd like to tell you, be as bold as possible, show audacity and avoid self-censure. Don't be shy, be bold. Because it's time for your words to be even more powerful. It's time for your proposals to be even more bold. Look how much young people in Europe and elsewhere in the world change everything when they fight for human rights, when they fight for the environment, when they fight for peace, when they fight for dignity. If we want to measure up with our collective European history, it will be through your words, through your commitments. We want young people to meet, and this is why we took up this crazy challenge to allow each European youth to experience a European civic service. What is it about? Nothing but meeting with other young people so that Europe is not just about words, so that Europe becomes a reality. Whether you're good at school or not so good, whether it's your first time at Collège de France or not, or maybe for those of you who've never studied at university and who are following this via ARTE, you need to realize that you belong, that we need you. We need all young European people, regardless of their background and regardless of where they are. A united Europe, a united France, a united Europe is a much stronger Europe. and unity
Parce que quand on
is a
voit
component
ce
of
qu'il y a de plus
dignity
précieux
today, because when we
les
see
foulées,
everything we have we consider very precious being
alors j'ai envie de
torn
dire,
apart,
levez-vous,
then
soyez
I
à la
want to
hauteur de ce
say
moment.
stand up
Ayez la force dans
and
vos mots, dans vos
have
plaidoyers,
power
mais surtout
in
engagez-vous.
your words,
Et
in
j'espère
everything
que
you
cette
say,
audace, maintenant
and
on a appelé à cette
be
audace, elle
involved.
sera à la hauteur.
And I hope your audacity
Et à la
will
hauteur
meet
des moments
the
historiques que nous
challenge
sommes en
of
train de
the
vivre. Merci
historic moment that we are experiencing together. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, merci Sarah El Haïry, Madame la secrétaire d'État.
Thank you very
Merci
much,
à vous.
Mrs. Junior Minister Sarah El Haïry. Thank you so much. Okay, so it's time for us to meet with 12 young people. There are 12 representing 52 young European men and women who met with the Jacques Delors Institute and the Make Sense non-profit. So these are young people who are very much involved and committed, and they decided to work on 3 major topics. The environment, obviously. For those of you who tried to walk around in Paris today, you probably saw long demonstrations in favor of the climate in Paris and in many other European cities. Environment and the rights of citizens. So each of them has 3 minutes, so just a few seconds for a technical transition, and we'll listen to what they have to offer us.
Ça y est, c'est prêt? C'est bon? On peut y aller? Bon, on fait ça entre nous. Hein.
Are we ready? Yes, we are. Okay, you know what, it's cozy here. I just checked with the control room to check if the technique was okay. So as I said, there are 12 of them, and you'll see these are fully committed young people in their respective countries. They're inspiring, they're young. And when I read their resume, I felt old. Because when you talk about audacity, we, age 40 and more, well, we'll have to do something to be up the challenge, because these kids, they're asking us to take our responsibility to change this world in which they will be living. So we'll start with you, Yavor. Yavor Razboinikov. Please, Yavor, come and join us. Yes. A round of applause for Yavor. Thank you.
Alors, je vous préviens, vous avez intérêt à être aussi énergique pour chacun.
You have to show as much energy for all of them. There are 12 of them first, and then 9. Yavor comes from Bulgaria. You're 21. You specialized in energy transition and sustainable development. You're currently studying in the Netherlands, and you're working at the University of Technology of Eindhoven. And you contributed to organizing demonstrations for climate in your country. So, Yavor, you have a proposal when you talk about the environment. Is everything fine?
Yes, but everything's fine?
Absolutely.
Absolutely? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, Yavor, the floor is yours. No, there's nobody. No worries, okay?
Absolutely.
Just you and I, okay? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was a moment of silence for all victims of all wars that are happening right now. Thank you. As you all very well know, in Europe, we have the habit of being addicted to war-fueling materials. Talking about fossil fuels, I'm talking about diamonds, I'm talking about rare earth metals. And as we are learning for another new time in these last weeks with the war in Ukraine, our addiction is fueling war. Luckily, when it comes to fossil fuels and our dependency, there is a solution. Renewable energies, they're there. But they require quite some space, and that is not a luxury we all have here in Europe. Wouldn't it be amazing if we could use the land that we're currently using for growing food to produce energy? Wouldn't that give us so much possibilities to preserve biodiversity? Well, I'm telling you, that is possible. It is possible. It's called agrivoltaics, and it's being practiced here in France, in Germany, in Japan, in China. And it works. We just need to scale it up. And on top of that, we can scale it up a lot. If we cover just 1% of our agricultural land, we will be able to double our target for 2030 for renewable energies. Isn't it amazing? Well, our committee thinks that it's great, and we have 3 steps how to speed this transition up, how to scale up agrivoltaics. 1 related to frameworks, 1 related to regulations, and a 3rd one related to awareness. Let's go. So, in terms of frameworks, we need to ensure our farmers that they will not lose their agricultural subsidies once they put solar panels above their fields. Makes sense, right? Besides that, we want to help them strike power purchasing agreements between them and their communities, so that these communities who are benefiting from these nice pasture lands that are being used for recreation are also receiving benefit from these solar panels that are put there. On top of this, we want to start tendering procedures so that developers are ensured that they can put their money in agrivoltaic projects. Second, I said something about regulations. Municipalities will have a lot of work to figure out how to zone their land. And we, as our committee, want to help them by increasing their capacity so that they're capable of making this process as smooth as possible. And third, none of what I just said would work if there's a lack of awareness. People need to know about agrivoltaics. Farmers need to know about agrivoltaics. So we want to have a comprehensive awareness-raising campaign throughout all Europe that brings the benefits of this technology to the fore. Believe me, 2030 is tomorrow, and 2050 is happening next month. If we don't act now, we could never, ever meet our targets and stay below 1.5 degrees. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Yavor. Bravo, bravo.
Thank you so much, Yavor.
Hendricks.
Valentine Hendricks. Please, yes, a round of applause for Valentine.
Merci pour vos encouragements.
Thank you for encouraging Valentine. Valentine, you come from Belgium, you're 19. You study political science at the University of Louvain. You also worked as a volunteer in a center for refugees in Rijkswaard. Okay, sorry for my pronunciation. You're also very much committed when it comes to climate, and you're responsible for recruitment for Youth for Climate in Belgium, and you also attended COP26 in Glasgow. Well, no, I was supporting the Belgian delegation, and I organized action in Belgium at that time. Okay, she's just a second, and they're all as committed. Valentine, over to you.
Nous vivons sur la planète bleue. Nos océans
We're living on
contrôlent
the
le
blue
climat,
planet. Our
sont le
oceans
principal
control
fournisseur de
climate,
nourriture pour
and they're
1,2
the
milliard de personnes
main
sur Terre, assurent
provider
la subsistance de
food for
50 millions d'autres
1.5
dans les
billion
océans.
inhabitants.
Mais c'est
They
aussi
provide
un des
food for
plus
people
puissants
living in
capteurs de
coastal
CO2.
areas.
Et
They are a CO2 sink, and oceans
Nos océans contrôlent le climat.
So
Ils
our
sont un des plus
oceans
puissants
control the
capteurs de
climate.
CO2.
They're one of the most
Ils nous
powerful
permettent
CO2
de
sink,
respirer
and they
l'oxygène
allow us to
qu'ils
breathe the oxygen they
Aujourd'hui,
produce.
plus que jamais, ils ont
Today,
besoin de
more
notre
than
soutien.
ever, they
Et au lieu de
need
ça, nous
our
les
support. And
exploitons
apart from,
et détruisons.
instead of doing that,
Il y a
we're
quelques jours à peine, le
destroying
GIEC
them.
a sorti son
A few
dernier
days
rapport,
ago,
nous expliquant
the
que
IPCC
3,5
published their
milliards de
latest
personnes,
report
c'est-à-dire presque
saying
une
that
personne sur deux,
3.5
vivaient dans
billion
des lieux ou
people
des
lived
contextes
in
extrêmement vulnérables au
areas
réchauffement
that were
climatique.
extremely
Alors, ne
vulnerable
serait-il
to
pas
global
vraiment temps de faire
warming.
quelque chose?
So don't you think it's high time we do
Les
something
aires
about
marines
it?
protégées,
The
dont je vais vous parler
protected
aujourd'hui, MPAs en anglais,
marine
aident à limiter
areas
la surpêche.
help
C'est donc un
limit
outil intéressant face au réchauffement
overfishing. So
climatique.
that's a very
Elles ont
interesting
des
tool
réglementations
when we talk about
spécifiques
global warming. They have
qui
specific
vont
regulations
donner des bénéfices
that
autant
will provide
environnementaux
benefit,
que socio-économiques.
environmental and social and
La
economic
conservation des
benefits.
environnements marins
Protecting marine
va
environments
permettre la stabilité
allows
des écosystèmes,
stabilizing the
mais aussi la
ecosystems
durabilité
and
et
ensures
va
the
aider au niveau économique
sustainability
les populations locales
and the economic
comme par
sustainability
exemple par le
of local
développement
populations
de
through
l'écotourisme.
the development of
Les données
ecotourism,
scientifiques
for
solides
instance.
existent déjà
There
à
is
propos
robust
de
scientific
ces
data that
MPAs
already
et soutiennent
exists
les
about these
leurs avantages.
marine protected areas,
Il y en a énormément
and
implémentés dans
all
le
this
monde, mais
data,
malheureusement en
all these
Europe,
data support this. But
très peu
unfortunately, in
sont
Europe,
satisfaisantes,
very
principalement pour deux
few
raisons. La première,
regulations are
étant que
satisfactory.
le soutien
One,
et l'intérêt
because
porté à ces
support
MPAs
and interest
sont
for
extrêmement
MPAs
minimes.
is
Et la deuxième
very
est qu'elles
reduced, and the
nécessitent
second
énormément
reason
de
is that
discussions et de
it requires
négociations
lots
diplomatiques
of
pour arriver à un
diplomatic
consensus.
negotiations
Et
before
c'est
we
encore plus
achieve a
compliqué
consensus.
quand on
And
doit
it's even
faire
more
face à des
complex
lois
when
européennes
we
et
have to
nationales
cope with
assez complexes.
a layer of European and then national laws.
Prenons l'exemple du parc
Let's
marin
take
professeur
the
Luis Saldana, qui est la
example
plus
of the
grande
Professor
MPA du Portugal
Luis
continental.
Saldana,
C'est une zone de
MPA
38
in
kilomètres sur la
Portugal.
côte.
It's 38
Son
kilometers along the
implémentation aurait dû être
coastline
un
of
succès.
Portugal.
Mais après
Its
2 ans,
implementation
les
should have been a
écosystèmes ne se
success,
sont pas
but after
restaurés.
2 years,
On
the
peut même dire que la
ecosystems
résultat
were
était
not
pire à
restored, and
cause
the outcome was even worse than the initial situation
de
because
l'illégalité de la
of
pêche
the
et du manque de
of
surveillance.
illegal fishing and lack of
Alors,
monitoring.
c'est un problème courant au sein de
So
l'Union
that's a
européenne,
current
malheureusement.
issue within the EU, unfortunately,
Car tous ces parcs marins
because
sont en fait
all
des parcs
these marine
théoriques,
parks
c'est-à-dire sur
are
papier,
theoretical
et
parks. They exist on
elles
paper,
n'aident que très faiblement.
but
Alors,
that
qu'est-ce qu'on
doesn't
peut
help much. So what can we do?
Nous avons un océan.
We
Nous
have
avons besoin
one ocean,
d'un
so
réseau.
we need one plan, one network. Our idea is for the EU to support these MPAs via a global network. We believe that the European Environment Agency has the authority, has the capacity to manage this network, to provide financial aid, and to encourage cooperation between different MPAs and different states in order to sort out the different problems that exist. We also strongly believe that the implementation of these MPAs to involve the various stakeholders, because promoting education to environmental challenges for future fishermen allows the current active population to create a sustainable world for the future. Thank you for your attention.
Bravo. Encore un peu. Merci, merci beaucoup Valentine et bravo, bravo.
Thank you
à vous.
so much, Valentine.
Sheldon Saliba, pardon. Sheldon
Saliba.
Hi Sheldon.
Hello, I don't speak French.
I know. Vous êtes de Malte, Sheldon, vous avez 22 ans, vous êtes étudiant en histoire de l'art à l'Université de Malte et vous avez vous aussi un grand intérêt porté un grand intérêt sur ces questions de sauvegarde de l'environnement et sur les questions de la démocratisation
and you also
culturelle.
work on
Alors,
cultural
c'est à vous.
democratization. So
Je vous
over
en
to
prie,
you, Sheldon, you have the floor.
The regional capital city of eastern Finland, Joensuu, set the ambitious goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2025. And to achieve this, they implemented a climate budget in order to reduce carbon emissions by 60% by 2025, and to compensate for the rest through the regeneration of carbon sinks. Other cities throughout the European Union, such as Stockholm, have implemented such budgets, but this needs to be done quicker and on larger scales in order to reach the EU target of being carbon neutral by 2050. So, how can we tackle this in action? Cities are not taking enough action as they should be, and want to make it easier for them by making climate measures a visible part of the annual economic plans. And how can this be implemented on an EU level? We are proposing a policy for quotas on climate budgets throughout every member state. This would involve the setting up of mechanisms which would be implemented by each country and would fix the percentage of each country. And for the first year, this would be implemented in at least larger and more polluting cities until it would be rolled out in other cities and towns. It would be incorporated as part of the annual city budgets and would tackle concrete plans aimed at tackling the main polluting sectors in our cities, namely transportation, energy, and the change in land use. It can also be directed towards adapting our cities to our changing climates. City councils, with the coordination of climate coordinators, would plan concrete and long-term actions, their time frame, and what their measures of success will be. Imagine having car-free Thursdays in your cities when you can walk down the main road. Or imagine having a public park instead of the road under your window, where you can enjoy a book under the shade of the trees. Or simply to adapt our cities to the rising sea levels. And to ensure that this budget is not misused, the measures would be checked annually to ensure that they have been implemented correctly. We are aware that tackling climate change costs money. Therefore, through the implementation of climate budgets, we aim at creating a path to ensure that necessary measures are implemented. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Sheldon, et bravo à vous. On continue avec Aiste.
Thank you so much, Sheldon.
Aiste, welcome.
We continue with Aiste Verikaite.
Aiste, vous venez de Lituanie, vous avez 23 ans.
Aiste, you come from Latvia, you're 23, you're studying business and entrepreneurship in the Kaunas University, and you work in fighting against waste. And you worked with the non-profit called Mesdarom that advocates for a smart way to design products and to consume. Aiste, you have the floor.
Good evening, everyone. Today I would like to present you proposals on generational renewal in agriculture. Nowadays, only 11% of all farm holdings in the European Union are run by farmers under the age of 40. There is a prediction that if nothing changes in the next 10 years, the number of farms might decrease to even 1/3 of what we have now. As farming population is growing older, who is going to cultivate food to our constantly increasing population? Our goal is to ensure sustainable agriculture and to feed growing population. Our objective is to attract young people to live in rural areas and to develop farming there. Our proposals are based on economy and social aspects. First of all, young farmers have limited access to agricultural land. They face financial problems. So we are suggesting a financial engineering instrument that would help young farmers to cover a loan up to 40%. Moreover, we would suggest considering a state fund guarantee that will help young farmers to obtain a loan. The guarantee could last up to 30 years. Secondly, to achieve the aim in attracting young people to live in rural areas, we would have to ensure proper education there. We would have to, first of all, improve general infrastructure there to ensure proper education, to enable youth to live a fulfilling life, and to have fully developed service sector. To sum up, we will feel safe that the food supply won't stop in the future when there will be enough of new generation farmers. Thank you very much.
Bravo à vous, AST, bravo. Alors,
well done, ST.
on a entendu beaucoup de choses. Yavor nous a parlé de soutenir le développement de l'agrivoltaïque. Valentine, un réseau européen des aires maritimes protégées.
We've heard about protected maritime spaces. We've heard about climatic budgets for cities. Sheldon talked to us about that. And ICE3 wants to make farming attractive and appealing for young people. Now, there are working groups that they all have worked on, and all this that we're hearing today is the fruition of that work. So we're opening now the page of human rights, and it's Vasilis Vouras who is going to be reading off the first page.
Vasilis,
you're 24, you come from Greece, you have a law degree at the University of Aristotle at Thessalonica, and you did an internship at the Permanent Representation of Greece at the EU, and you've held a number of positions in the European Association of Law Students in particular, and you have an inclination, a particular inclination for human rights across Europe, and even you've been involved in campaigns. Anyway, over to you. Thank you very much.
Freedom of speech holds an important position in the democratic process as it enables citizens to have an unbiased, open and transparent political discussion. As much as it is important that we enable citizens to express their opinion, we must enable citizens also to retain their right to reply. That is, citizens should be able to protect themselves and to defend oneself when they confront a harmful content and when they want to protect themselves against public criticism in the same venue where it was published. Imagine the situation of a local political leader who publishes a controversial opinion on his Facebook page about how vaccines don't work or that the war between Ukraine and Russia doesn't exist. As the moderator of that medium, he has the chance to ban someone from commenting or to delete comments from people that he disagrees with, thus restricting unbiased political discussion, and in this way it is really easy to manipulate the choice of what to publish and what not to publish. This restricts the right to reply. For the confrontation of this situation, we propose a two-dimensional proposal. Firstly, we believe that the Audiovisual Media Services Directive of EU needs to extend the right to reply to on-demand media services like recordings of broadcasts, like documentaries on Netflix. In this way, citizens will have the chance to have their recorded replies, and as this only applies for correcting misinformation, this will not overload the media publishers with requests. Secondly, as the moderation of public debates on digital platforms seems necessary in order to avoid the spread of misinformation, it is crucial that moderators do not abuse their power in order to restrict the right of people to voice their opinion. Within the framework of the right to reply, we propose the construction by the European Commission of a pan-European oversight body, which will be a transparent and independent body with binding decisions, and it will consist of specialists in the field of human rights in the digital space. In this context, citizens will have the chance to defend oneself when they confront a harmful content against their personal right, or to know exactly the reasons of an unjust removal or a ban from a digital platform because, for example, of a political disagreement, and in this way appeal this decision of the moderator to this panel. We hope that our points make it clear why it is important to revise laws concerning to the right to reply, and we call you to support us in order to minimize the spreading of misinformation and to protect and promote the right to reply. Thank you.
Merci Vassilis, merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Vassilis.
Je vous propose de
What I
rencontrer
suggest
Rocio
is
Rodriguez.
that we now turn to Rocio Rodriguez Roldan.
Rocio, vous avez 25
So, Rocio,
ans, vous êtes
you are
espagnol,
25, you're
vous êtes diplômé
Spanish,
d'histoire de l'art
you
à
have
l'université
an
de
art
Séville,
history
et
degree
vous êtes
from the
actuellement
University of
en
Seville.
master, et
You're
vous travaillez
currently
sur
in a
le
master's
patrimoine
program. You
andalou.
work on Andalusian
Vous comptez même,
heritage,
vous lancer dans une thèse, vous êtes
and
très engagé
you're
sur la
embarking,
question
well, you
féministe.
hope to embark
Vous
upon
avez fait
a
de
doctoral
nombreuses
thesis. You're very much involved in
notamment
feminist,
professionnelles, pour
in
faire
the
un pont
feminist
entre l'art
realm,
et la question de la
and
condition des
you
femmes.
look
Vous avez
at
été
art
conférencière
and the
notamment
female
sur la question des
question.
enjeux des
You've
artistes
also
étrangers
made
en Espagne
conferences
dans
on
l'entre-deux-guerres,
foreign artists in
ou
Spain
la
in the
cartographie féminine des émotions
interbellum period,
dans la
and also
littérature
feminine
et l'art.
mapping of
Rocio,
emotions in
everything's fine.
art and literature.
Yeah,
Rocio,
let's
all
go.
good? Okay, over to you.
We are in 2022, in a modern continent. But still, talking about this seems to be something revolutionary. And I want to ask you, why? Because I'm sure that everyone here knows what this is, and that a lot of us use it regularly. So, why don't we talk about pads and tampons as something normal? Are we ashamed? Or maybe we just don't care about normalizing the menstruation? Because the lack of education and consideration is not just making it difficult for certain people to have access to menstrual products, but promoting a still existing taboos about the feminine body. And the fact that the period poverty is an ongoing issue only proves that. So, let me ask you again. Why don't we talk about how, in a lot of countries, menstrual products are taxed as non-essential items? Why don't we consider that women and girls and, for example, refugee camps can't take proper care of themselves, but still have the period once a month? Why don't we do something about this? Because the most impressive thing of all of this is how easy it would be to solve this issue. Let's provide, let's educate, let's normalize. We ask every state member to do their own research, to identify the beneficiaries and the partners, and to develop a one-year pilot program to ensure that every woman, girl, and teenager have access to menstrual products monthly. We ask every country to offer sanitary items in the bathrooms of schools, high schools, and universities to create places where everybody could satisfy their own necessities. We ask the institutions to provide hygiene products to people at the risk of poverty. Let's change the life of the woman who can't afford sanitary pads and has to use non-hygienic alternatives instead. Let's change the life of the teenager too shy to ask for a tampon when she forgets her own. Let's change the life of the girl afraid of growing up because nobody has explained to her that our bodies and sexuality are as natural as life itself. We all know this girl. So let's make her life better. Thank you.
Rocio, je crois que vous avez conquis
Rocio,
la
I
salle,
think you've
et pas
probably
que la salle.
conquered the hearts and minds in the auditorium and no doubt beyond. So we turn now to Luka Duditz. I hope I've pronounced that properly. Welcome to you. Do apologise if I've mispronounced your surname.
Luka, vous venez de
Luka,
Hongrie,
you
vous
come
avez
from
23
Hungary,
ans,
you're
vous êtes
23,
diplômé de
you
l'Université
hold
Collège of
a
London en histoire,
degree in
politique,
history,
économie, vous êtes
politics and
membre
economics from the UCL.
d'ARTE.tv.
You
Non?
have been involved in data ASAC. Hang on a sec, just pretend you're not there. Hang on a sec, what's this?
Ah,
It's an,
okay.
it's an NGO.
How can I say it?
Data?
Hatter.
Hatter.
Okay,
Hatter.
that's it.
Hatter. Okay. Hatter Tarsasag. Okay, sorry. Thanks for your help. Anyway, it's an NGO to defend the community of LGBTQI+. You were communication officer, media relations officer for that NGO, and you also did an internship at the International Organization of Migration in Budapest, and you worked considerably on violence, gender-based violence. So off we go then, shall we?
Blood donation. We might think of blood donation as a kind gesture, maybe as a civic duty. But what if we look at blood donation from a human rights perspective? Could it be a tool of stigmatization? As of right now, 3 members of the European Union requires a lifetime exclusion, and many others a disproportionately long deferral period for men who have sex with men, so gay and bisexual men. We need a more explicit EU legislation to abolish the discrimination based on sexual orientation when donating blood. The legal framework for ensuring the safety and quality for blood and its components is set out the Directive 2002/98/EC, the European Blood Directive. It covers all steps of the transfusion process from donation to distribution. And its implementing directive requires the exclusion of persons whose sexual behavior puts them at high risk of acquiring sexual infectious diseases. This provision has been interpreted by many national health agencies as a blanket exclusion of all men who have sex with men. But there is no scientific or medical proof that such a permanent ban should exist. In 2015, the European Court of Justice ruled that the blanket exclusion of men who have sex with men is only legal if the safety of blood cannot be ensured by less onerous methods. But these methods exist, and they have existed for a long time. This exclusion has been previously attributed to 2 things. One is a higher risk of HIV transmission. There is a so-called window period in which a person might have and transmit HIV, but would still produce a negative test. Therefore, individuals with a higher risk of transmitting such diseases were excluded for a shorter or longer period of time. And then we come to the second point, the assumption that all sexual relations between men are automatically with a higher risk of HIV transmission. This assumption is completely false and scientifically unfounded. For example, a gay couple in a monogamous relationship is at the very same risk level as their heterosexual counterparts. A window period is a maximum of 6 weeks. So why are gay and bisexual men barred for a year or for an entire lifetime? This is shameful, humiliating, and most of all, scientifically unfounded. And this is exactly what LGBT people mean when they say that their identities are stigmatized. Let us move on from these stigmas. We propose a new way of ensuring that gay and bisexual men can donate blood in the European Union. Let's break down stigma by awareness-raising campaigns for this society. Let's educate health professionals and decision makers, include up-to-date, scientifically funded information in medical curricula, and ensure that all health professionals have access to LGBT-inclusive trainings. And thirdly, and most importantly, include an anti-discrimination clause in the European Blood Directive. We ask all members of the European Parliament to push for change. We urge the College of Commissioners to review the European Blood Directive. Blood donation in Europe can be and should be fair and equal for all of us.
Merci Luca, merci beaucoup. Nous continuons avec Saskia Postema.
Thank you very much. Let's carry on with Saskia Postema.
Saskia, vous avez 26
Saskia,
ans.
you're
vous venez des
26.
Pays-Bas,
You
vous
come
avez
from the
suivi un master
Netherlands.
de relations internationales
You did
et
a master
diplomatie.
in
Vous enseignez
diplomacy and
actuellement,
international relations. You
en études
currently
de sécurité
teach
à la faculté de
in
gouvernement
security
et affaires
studies
internationales
at
de
the
l'université
Faculty
de Leiden,
of
et vous travaillez
Governance
également en tant
at the Leiden
qu'éditrice
University.
média
You also
pour
work as a
le
media
journal
editor
Diplomatie
for
de
the
l'AE.
Hague
C'est bien
Journal
ça?
of
Thank you for joining
Diplomacy.
us.
Thanks very much.
Yes.
Okay, let's go.
All right. Thank you so much. It's a devastating statistic, but it's true. 1 in 3 women experience violence, and yet less than 40% will actually go and report about their experiences. It shows us that this is an epidemic, and it's one with far-reaching consequences. Just think of the physical, the psychological, and the economical impact that this has on victims. And yet, even though we cannot, of course, put a price to the pain and suffering of these victims, we do know that this cost the European Union around 366 billion euros each year. So just imagine what we could do with that amount of money instead. But to date, there is no strategy, no framework, no legislation that has been adopted by the European Union on gender-based violence. And so that is what we propose to do today by introducing a directive specifically geared towards the definition of gender-based violence, in which we would focus on 5 distinct dimensions. There is the physical dimension, the psychological dimension, the sexual, the economic, and also an online element there. In doing so, we would be able to better coordinate policies, but also very important monitoring and evaluation tools that can actually help us combat this epidemic EU-wide. And it would also allow us to actually look for particular risk factors, such as poverty. And in doing so, we would move from reaction policies to prevention policies. Secondly, as online violence increases, it's incredibly important that we continue to use and apply gender-sensitive lenses to legislation on digital services. And for this reason, we urge the Council to incorporate non-compliance measures on gender-based violence prevention in the ongoing negotiations of the Digital Service Act. Lastly, in an effort to demonstrate that the European Union's commitment to preventing and combating gender-based violence is something that knows no borders, we would call for an instatement of a European-wide hotline that victims can call and they can be connected to local authorities, but also support agencies. To conclude, an EU-wide directive on gender-based violence and its definitions can actually help us break new ground when it comes to facilitating a comprehensive approach on both the detection and the prevention of gender-based violence across all of the member states. And it would help us actually facilitate the important resources needed to help victims in rebuilding their lives and livelihoods. So tonight, we call upon the European Union to take a radically different approach and to actually take their responsibility in protecting and safeguarding the rights of millions of Europeans to be safe from harm in both physical and online spaces. Thank you.
J'ai omis d'ajouter tout à l'heure concernant la présentation de Saskia.
With regards to Saskia's presentation, I forgot to say that Saskia works with an NGO managed by young people, for young people, called Choice. And they work...
I know, I was talking about Saskia, but no worries. Donc, cette organisation, justement,
So this organization aims at fighting for the health and sexual rights.
Nice to meet you.
Inigo Benito.
Et c'est avec Inigo Benito Simon Ricard, espagnol de 21 ans, que nous allons ouvrir la question des solidarités
Inigo Benito Simon Ricard, 21,
Benito,
Spanish.
vous êtes
We are
inscrit à
going to
l'École
talk about
d'économie de
international
l'Université de Navarra
relationships.
Pampelune,
You
et
study
vous représentez la
in
communauté
the
autonome
Pamplona
de Pirineo Navarro, donc, un projet de
University.
création
You
d'un
represent
service
the
pour
autonomous
faciliter
community
l'accès aux biens
of
premières
Pirineo
nécessités à des
Navarro.
citoyens de
And
la
you
région,
want
et
to
vous faites
create a
partie des
service
change
to
makers
facilitate access to
Zurich
basic
Concept.
commodities to the citizens of your region. You're also part of the Change Makers organization. Are you with me? Let's go.
Let's go. Thank you.
Thank you. European migration policy is not working. According to Eurostat data, every single second we spend here debating about the future of the European Union, 9 people are arriving at our borders. Since 2015, more than 24 million people have come to the European Union looking for a brighter future. Our response? A chaotic, but most of all, undecent welcome of migrants who crowd together at the door of our southern country member states. So, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question. Does the EU solidarity principle end at our European borders? To be honest, it's not urgent to act now. It was already urgent to act 7 years ago. For almost a decade, we've been losing lives and futures. But today we have the opportunity of looking forward, the opportunity of underlining a topic that's been forgotten. Today, we are in front of those who have the duty, the responsibility, and most of all, the power of triggering that change. Current migration agreements are not working. Dublin agreements do not meet neither country's needs nor European migration reality. These agreements are based on the first country of entrance criterion, which means that migrants must stay at the country they arrive at, reducing their future possibilities. That's why we propose a unified, collaborative, and most of all, binding new migration agreement. Unitary, because it will consist of a common mechanism meeting all countries' needs. Collaborative, because it will involve every country member state. And most of all, binding, because there's no opt-out. Hard sanctions will be imposed to those country member states not following the agreement. This agreement will consist of creating a legal framework divided in 2 parts. On the one hand, financial solidarity from those countries less affected by migration. On the other hand, a unified and fair distribution of migrants amongst all country member states. The benefits are clear, not only for migrants who will be finally treated in a decent human way within European borders, but also for us as EU citizens. We will finally silence those racist speeches, will increase peaceful coexistence and dialogue with migrants. And even more, for the European Union as an institution, his image will be better off by not only preaching for solidarity, but by actually implementing it. Ladies and gentlemen, I dream about a European Union in which human beings are treated like human beings again. I dream about a European Union in which solidarity oversteps any border. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup Inigo Benito et bravo à vous.
Thank you so much, Inigo Benito.
Et on va en direction de la
Moving
République tchèque
on
avec
to the
Zuzana
Czech
Ellerova.
Republic with Zuzana Ellerova.
Susanna, vous avez 21 ans.
Susanna,
Vous êtes
you're
étudiante au
21,
Master
you're
Affaires publiques européennes à
studying
l'Université de
in
Maastricht.
European
Vous avez
Public
suivi une licence
Affairs with the
politique européenne.
University
Vous
of
avez réalisé
Maastricht. You had many internships and you were involved in a project linked to menstrual health in Uganda, and you worked with a team of UNICEF students in Maastricht. You worked in a center for refugees. Wow, what an experience.
I fear for my life. For the first time, I do not feel safe living in the European Union. Those were the thoughts running through my head on the 24th of February, the day when the Russian invasion of Ukraine started. Will Ukraine be the only country attacked? Or will the Russian army attack any of the member states of the Union? And what happens if the state attacked is not a member of NATO? Europe's security and the lives of Europeans are at stake, and the stakes are high. This is why we believe that the European Union needs more legitimacy and power in conflict prevention as well as conflict intervention. The Union must be able to effectively intervene in potential future military conflicts that threaten Europe's security. Our proposition has two components. Firstly, as a part of conflict prevention, we propose creating a space where active negotiations would happen from the moment of the first sight of a potential conflict. We propose creating a new body, the European Committee of Mediation, which would be presided by the European External Action Service. The committee would invite all actors concerned in the tense situation to the table for multilateral negotiations with the aim to find a solution for the crisis. Secondly, we propose creating a European collective armed force, which would allow the Union to act quickly in case of a conflict. This force would not only give the Union the power to defend itself, but it would also enable the deployment of peace enforcement and peace-building missions whenever the European security order is in danger. We believe that our two propositions would increase the Union's strategic autonomy, safeguard the lives of Europeans, ensure the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and contribute to global peace, while being fully complementary with NATO. Our propositions will, however, be effective only when combined with other changes in the already existing security and defense framework. So, let's also strengthen the European Defense Union, increase the budget of the European Defense Fund, make a greater use of the European Peace Facility, and, crucially, let's adopt the strategic compass this month. Looking into more distant future, let's change the Lisbon Treaty so that it allows to fund defense from the Union budget. In conclusion, since the start of the war in Ukraine, security and defense policies have gained a whole new level of relevance, haven't they? If there has ever been the right moment to move towards common European defense, it is now. Nobody in Europe wants a war. We all want to live in peace. But in a world of complex security threats, Europeans must be prepared. Thank you.
Merci Susanna. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much, Susanna. Now we'll listen to Marcus O'Fallon.
Welcome.
Welcome, Marcus.
Welcome to you, Marcus. Vous êtes irlandais, vous avez 23 ans, vous avez suivi des études.
Marcus, you're Irish, you're 23, you studied at Trinity College in Dublin, and you embarked on the Erasmus program. You studied in Siena, in Italy. You were awarded a beautiful award from the Royal Irish Academy of Music, and when you were in high school, you were awarded a prize by the United Nations. Thank you.
Democracy and the freedoms that we take for granted in Europe are under greater threat than they have been in decades at the moment. Just over 2 weeks ago, the Russian Federation launched an invasion in order to overthrow the democratically elected government of Ukraine. While the invasion is a very clear and open attempt to destroy democracy in a European nation, a much quieter form of democratic backsliding has been going on within the EU. Over the past decade, illiberal, authoritarian, and populist governments have risen within member states. These governments have restricted press freedom, limited the independence of the judiciary, and clamped down on civil society actors, NGOs, and universities. These so-called illiberal democracies have undermined the strength and unity of the European Union by impeding the process of free and fair elections. We have seen, for example, in Cyprus, that Turkish and Greek-speaking Cypriots have suffered the consequences and still are suffering the consequences of division and war that started decades ago. Illiberal practices have thus blossomed on this island. The authoritarian tendencies of these illiberal democracies have also lent credibility and legitimacy to despotic regimes such as that of Vladimir Putin. We propose 2 actions in order to deal with the rise of illiberal democracy. The first action regards the creation of an EU Office for Democratic Values. This office will be able to create annual reports in order to measure democracy, using measures such as press freedom, the independence of the judiciary, and the strength of civil society. The office will therefore be able to accurately identify any instances of democratic backsliding and appropriately advise the EU on how to correct such backsliding. The office will furthermore be able to research the causes of rising illiberalism within Europe. The second action we propose regards the creation of a common European curriculum of rights and democratic values. We propose that this curriculum be freely available online to be taught in and outside EU member states. We propose that democratic values and human rights be promoted within this curriculum. Finally, in an age where social media misinformation can change the outcome of elections, digital skills have become more important than ever. We propose that lessons on identifying misinformation be available as part of this curriculum, so that students may be able to identify on traditional and social media the difference between truthful and false information. We hope that these actions can, for example, bring about reconciliation between Turkish-speaking and Greek-speaking Cypriots, who, through their different schooling systems, learn different versions of history, and through their different media systems, receive different information, which causes tension and conflict between the communities. In conclusion, we have seen over the past 2 weeks the importance of democratic institutions and democratic values. But we have also seen how fragile such values are, how quickly they can be taken away, and how important it is that we protect them. The democracy and freedoms that we enjoy, that we are privileged to have, must be guaranteed for future generations and for the future of Europe. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Marcus. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much, Marcus. All right, and we'll finish with the 12th proposal from Maurice Volker, who's coming forward as I speak.
Maurice,
you're 19, you're German, you're still at school, and you were involved in a number of projects since the European elections 2019, including a project called Meet EU, a pan-European project, and in that you launched one campaign, including Let's Hear European Students' Voice, which is designed to involve 16 to 24-year-old Europeans in the changing face of the future of Europe, and you're also involved in UNICEF in your birth town, and that for the last 5 years. So welcome to you, Moritz, over to you.
It's very hard to be the last one after so many amazing proposals and pitches. So I will try my best, and yeah. I would like to start with a small question to you. Do you remember the time when those were costing around 20 euros because the supply of those were short in the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020? Well, in the same time, the German government has created export restrictions on medical material, which also applied to other EU countries. This was a real low position or low situation for the so-called European solidarity and cooperation. But the European Union was not the only regional organizations with this problem. Headlines such as ASEAN's COVID-19 response, united in name, divided in practice, or excerpts like, it's fair to say that Mercosur's response on the COVID-19 pandemic has been mixed at best by an LSE publication, are underlining that different regional organizations are facing the same problems in tackling pandemics. And we all know that shared problems require shared approaches. Therefore, our group advocates for the creation of a forum of regional organizations. We propose that within this forum, in consultation of the VHW and non-governmental organizations, there should be a place for exchange on governance actions at the regional level, as well as for inter-regional cooperation. Regional organizations must establish central capacity management structures. This includes, for example, monitoring of available resources, for example, masks, in order to share and distribute material in urgently needed situations and regions. Another very important part for preparing for health crises is the building of production infrastructures. So, for example, building of production infrastructure for producing medicine or vaccinations. Another important point is a shared research landscape. And last but not least, so-called crisis response protocols are essential in order to tackle pandemics at a regional level. Regarding the North-South divide, it is essential that cooperation within the forum is based on solidarity action, because we all know that pandemics do not stop at national or even continental borders. Here, the European Union must support the training of medical staff, for example by financing training programs, as well as exchange programs. And last but not least, a very important point is also that the European Union should work towards the technology transfer, because COVAX has shown us that the donations by the wealthier countries alone are not sufficient in order to enable a fair and equal vaccination campaign around the world. In order to advance the progress of integration within the regional organizations, negotiation within the forum of regional organizations need to take place at the so-called regional and not national level. The forum of regional organizations will provide a space for exchange on crisis response and preparation. But who knows, perhaps this forum would be also a concept worth to be extending to other areas beside the pandemic response. The EU will not only benefit symbolically, but also create a joint and sustainable venue for future cooperation at the interregional level. Therefore, we call on the European External Action Service, as well as the European Council, to initiate such a forum in cooperation with the regional organizations, and considering the progress which has been made during the last 2 years at a European level. Well, we all know that perhaps there will be a new pandemic in the future, but it's up to us to prevent the headlines I've mentioned earlier, and therefore we are sure that if our proposal would be implemented, we could have a more efficient way on how to tackle pandemics in the future and create real European and global solidarity for tackling pandemics and health crises in future generations. Therefore, thank you very much for the attention, and I wish you a very pleasant discussion now.
Thank you, Moritz. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Moritz. All right, then. So these proposals were bold, are bold, flowing from a number of weeks of work with the NGO Make Sense and the Institute Jacques Delors. My thoughts go to Sébastien, who's just joined me on the rostrum. And we're going to ask you, well, Collège de France, I do apologize, okay, but we're going to make a massive noise, a thunderous applause for these young people who've spoken before you this evening. Thank you.
Bravo, bravo, Moritz, Marcus,
Well
Susanna,
done, all of you.
Benito, Saskia, Luca,
Lucio, Vassili,
Yavor,
Yavor,
Valentine,
Valentine, Sheldon,
bravo à tous.
and basically welcome
beaucoup
to all of you. Thank you very much for this sterling work that you've done. So now, we're going to move on to our second and last part of our European Night of Ideas to see to what extent these proposals are applicable and what time frame, how to bring them before European bodies, how to get an appropriate legal framework. So before we address ourselves to the panel and welcome the fresh round of young people on the rostrum, we'll just have a brief pause.
voici avec un nouveau panel.
Here we are with another panel. Welcome. Well done for all the work you've done. We're delighted to see you and to extend the work that you've done and the dialogue, the discussion, the proposals, now that we can put them before the panel. So let me start by the introductions. Samantha Besson, you're a legal officer. You're a professor here at the Collège de France. You hold the chair of international law and of institutions. You taught law in Freiburg University. You studied at Oxford, Freiburg, Portugal, United States, Germany, Netherlands. Have I missed one? That's not too bad, is it, really, as a list? You also specialized in human rights, European institutional rights, and democracy and citizenry. Now, we have Luis Quintana Murci. Welcome. You're also a major European, and you're here you're a biologist and a genetician. You are a professor at Collège de France, chair of human genomics and evolution. You're also director of the evolutionary genetics unit in the Pasteur Institute. You were born in Spain. You've studied in Barcelona. You took your doctorate in Padua in Italy, and in Sorbonne universities you were accredited with direct research work. Your research is on the evolution of the human genome, the diversity and adaptation to external constraints, especially pathogens. Didn't understand a word of that. I don't know about you. Anyway, you'll have to tell us what all that is about. Lastly, Sébastien Maillard, you are a director of the Jacques Delors Institute, a laboratory of ideas on European issues. You were a long-time journalist at La Croix, a correspondent in Brussels and Rome. You specialized in European affairs. You were also a member of the Scientific Council of the Maison de Robert Schuman and member of the Orientational Council of the Open Diplomacy Institute and College of Qualified Personalities of the European Movement, France. So, first question before introducing our panel of young people, I said by way of introduction, to go over the last few years, in particular in terms of the climate, young people have made demonstrations, have gone on strike to show that climate for them is absolutely central, absolutely crucial. For all that, of course, in their private concerns, of course, but for all that, the ICCC, which brought out its report last week, which came at the same time as the Ukraine war, things aren't moving fast or enough given the state of emergency. Does this mean that when you've got these young people throwing themselves into the fray, there is a problem, which is institutions that just don't listen? And why? Why is it important to hear these young people, such as we're doing this evening? Samantha, perhaps you'd like to start? I don't know. Yes, thanks very much. I don't mind starting. Hello to one and all, and well done to all the teams. I want to say that before I start. This is a major red letter day. Thanks very much. So it's an important question you're putting, and you use the word listen and hear. And I think we hear these young people, we don't listen to them enough. And I think this evening could be taking us down that road. But of course, to listen, you need institutions. You need institutional channels that are open. And I think this is what we're lacking. Now, Switzerland is in Europe, and I'm Swiss. Perhaps Europe needs more tools for direct democracy in the EU. With new technologies, that would be possible. To develop said tools, the European Citizen Initiative is not enough. We need to work hugely on that matter. So hearing is all very well and good. Listening is better. All right, then. So this is what we're doing, starting to do at least this evening. Sébastien, what are your thoughts? We've got direct democracy. We've also got representative democracy, traditional representative democracy. But even there, the young people can do things. German elections held last year. If you look at the young person's vote, which contributed considerably to that election held in September last. We saw that the new coalition that has turned up in Germany with a climate agenda, which is very bold, it must be said. And this coalition was built on the back of young voters and has changed things in Germany. So I think there again, when young people do vote, but when there was the Brexit, the referendum in the UK, young people didn't move, really, didn't vote, and then regretted not having voted at that referendum about bringing the UK out of Europe. I'm talking, of course, people who are against the Brexit. So young people, whether they get involved or not in a vote, that does change, does have an impact. Louise, you're a European. What are your thoughts about this? Well, everything that we've heard so far this evening, it's really a source of hope in the future, in my view. But part of me, obviously, makes me think this is fabulous, but there's also a practical side to me, which makes me say that I think we need to listen to these young people more, and it shouldn't only be, let's just tick boxes, and that the politicians, maybe they've gone, I don't know, but they should show an interest in that. I mean, it's not just a box-ticking process of LGBT or integration or what have you. And if it is a tick-boxing exercise, then it's sad. All right, then let me just present the young people that you're going to be debating with this evening. The idea being, of course, is to set in train this discussion. Hopefully, will not end this evening. Obviously, we want to make sure this discussion is extended for a long, long time, and of course, to extend its scope. So we have Diana Mashrak with us. Where's Diana? Diana, welcome to you. You are French. Next to you, we have Elisa Henke. Here she is. So you're not next door to each other at all, as I see. You come from Germany. Matthias Slitz, you come from Austria. That's right, isn't it? Nadia Budestrup, you come from Denmark. Maria Christia, you're Romanian. Maria, welcome to you. Ezgis Brukas, have I got your name desperately wrong? Oh, goodness me, I got it right. That's a surprise. Christine, you're Belgian. Christina Kakuliva, you come from Cyprus. Welcome to you. Esther Zitel, you come from Austria. Welcome to you. And then lastly, Maya Shakrivayan. Is that right?
Wow!
Wow, goodness me.
Merci beaucoup.
I've surpassed myself. Thanks very much. And I didn't study Finnish. Far from it. Anyway, perhaps you could introduce yourself very briefly. Each of you have chosen a particular field, and you've heard proposals going to that field: environment, Europe in the world, and of course, human rights. Now, I'd like to hear each of you later on, when we start on this debate, about why you chose that particular sphere. But perhaps we can start straight away by the EU in the world, perhaps. And the Ukrainian war, obviously, raises the matter of powerful Europe, as the Minister mentioned earlier on. Matthias, Elisa, and Diana, you're part of this particular working group. Matthias, can you tell us why you decided to work on that particular point? Could you introduce yourself very, very briefly? 1 or 2 seconds, in fact, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes, of course. My name is Matthias List. I'm 24 years old and coming from Austria. I took this particular topic because I'm interested in politicians regarding European. And as there were recent events from Corona pandemic, we wanted to establish a forum where regional organizations are distributing healthcare, medicine and medical devices. This could also apply to the current crisis in Ukraine, and therefore this was the topic I've chosen.
Merci beaucoup, et vous nous en parlerez.
And you'll tell us about that later on. So, Eliza, why did you choose to be part of this working group?
So to introduce myself very quickly, I'm Elisa. I am 20 years old and I'm from Germany. And I think I could tell you for many hours why I chose this topic, but to wrap it up quickly, I think there's no way around it. I engaged myself in the topic of the new Dublin Agreement, and to be short, I worked with migrants on the Greek islands and on the north of Greece. I saw the people, I saw their stories, and I saw the lack of the future. So for me, there was no way around it, and this was an opportunity to maybe build a future with and for them.
Diana, vous aussi, c'est votre engagement.
It's also your commitment that led you to choose this particular theme. Is that right? Yes, my name is Diana Majszak. As you can you see, my surname is a bit tricky because it's Polish. I'm Franco-Polish. So European defence is as old as European institutions. We thought it was very important to involve it in a genuine dialogue between politicians, experts and young people, particularly so with what's going on with the Ukrainian crisis. This topic is all the more important. And it's particularly important to hear young people's voice in this particular realm. So our proposal has changed considerably in the light of the Ukrainian crisis. All right then, so you were in that working group, working on the proposal going to maintaining peace in Europe, or peacekeeping operations in Europe. You say that your proposal has changed in light of the Ukrainian crisis. So how so? What question will you be putting to our panelists? Why have you changed in your thinking within your group, and why do you think it's very important to talk about peacekeeping operations? Well, if you look at the UN regulations, there are peacekeeping operations, reconciliation protocol, peace building, peace reinforcement operations. Now, before this crisis, primarily, we were looking at peacemaking, reconciliation, mediation, with the idea of constituting a European mediation committee, thinking about situations where the EU didn't have enough influence. Just look at what happened between Azerbaijan and Armenia. It's a case in point, or other theatres of conflict dotted around the European continent and the EU's borders. Now, following this Russian invasion, we said to ourselves, that's just not enough. And even though it's very bold, obviously this would require totally revising the European treaties. It'd be a huge amount of work that have to be done. But maybe it will have a silver lining, that amount of work, even though, of course, I mean, the fact there was Brexit as well, which had a very anti-European defence position that was very pro-NATO. The fact that Donald Trump, the former US president, was ready to withdraw from NATO, that President Macron said that NATO in the day, not too far away, in fact, was in a state of cerebral death. All that means that we need this European defence now. And, we stand by that. Matthias, what are your thoughts?
Matthias, this is probably the same reasons why you decided to work with this working group, and you decided to go beyond this taboo, because the idea of the European defence is still the topic of many controversies.
Sorry, I couldn't understand the translation correctly. If you could repeat it.
Yes, I will repeat. How did you experience this work in the working group, and how did the events in Ukraine make you move past this taboo of a Europe of defense?
Yeah, the work in our group was pretty good, I would say. There's always this intercultural differences or barriers that you have when you work with different people. And regarding the situation in Ukraine, we have the problem that people are not getting treated fast, that the supplies are partly missing, and therefore we advocate for a centralized management, capacity management system that helps to distribute like medical devices, medical help, and medical aid. And therefore, it is really important to tackle such crisis in a European way, with in a European way which is diverse in the culture, but united in their values.
Sébastien, peut-être puis Samantha sur cette question.
Sébastien, Samantha.
Le tabou d'une défense commune.
This taboo of a European defense. It's easy to overcome when you're under 25. Well, there are many taboos going down at the moment. This is a night of ideas, but this is a historical moment where reality advances faster than we can think. And the Europe of defense, that's an old idea. Since 1952, we've been talking about this since 1952. And all of a sudden, it makes a giant leap forward because we realize how much we miss it. If we were to add up all the defense budgets of all our member states, even before they were recently increased, they are 3 times higher than that of Russia. If we were to add up all our troops in our different armies, we have more than the US. So we have a defense, and we don't know it. Because when there is no Europe, you have redundancies, you have weapon systems that can't work together. That's a lot of waste. And there is a need to do something. And we have tools already. We have a European Defence Agency since 2004. We have programs in place, but we've never gone beyond the political will because we lack this shared analysis of a threat. And this war of Putin's choice makes this very clear. And I'm eager to see what will be included in the strategic compass that will be adopted in our future European Summit of 24th and 25th of March. It's being totally rewritten at the moment, and I hope we will find reasons to be more united when it comes to threats for all European citizens, whether from Latvia, Greece, or wherever, because based on our history, we see things in a different way, but when we have a shared and common analysis, when we have shared and common tools, maybe we can take action together. Maybe this is what's going to happen, but we also need to go beyond opposing NATO and Europe of defense, because it can't be one or the other, one against the other. For a long while, we have to work with the two as a complementarity. Yeah, but Samantha Besson, with what's going to come out from this European summit and this willingness to move towards a Europe of defense, and between this and an army for peace, isn't there a huge gap? And can this Europe of defense, can it become operational within a few months or a few years? Well, I'd like to say that we need to take time and think, and we need to keep cool heads. I think we need to do things calmly. We can't take motivated by emotions. You talked about taboos, and you immediately talked about emotions. When you talk about taboos, you talk about emotions, but it's not a political issue. It's not talking about politics. So I was wondering if young people talked about sovereignty, national sovereignty, popular sovereignty, because there is nothing more critical than defense for a population. And how can we make this European defense democratic? That's the question. When you say democratic, so to be clear, because I'm not an expert, but it means how can we operate together, the 27 states, with a defense, with a joint command? Is this what you mean, or is it controlling the defense action? Well, coming back to what was said earlier brilliantly by my colleague, the young people explained why they came up with their proposals, and they said they first wanted to strengthen the peacekeeping operations already carried out by Europe under the auspices of NATO or the United Nations. But they added to that, and they spoke about Europe of defense with a defense military part. So can this be organized already with what we have in terms of treaty? Well, I have great doubts about that, because we'll have to change the treaty. And I think the question of sovereignty, the question of democracy, the question of the involvement of the European Parliament is crucial. If I may, at the beginning, we started from the strategic compass suggested by Mr. Borrell, and we have the first pillar with a technical battalion of 5,000 men, which has been in existence for a while. This is why we didn't use the word European army, because there are issues of governance, and we'll have endless debates about this. But there are so many cooperation mechanisms, not to mention the OSCE or NATO. As Mr. Maillard said, there are many cooperations already, and we do believe that if it's just a matter of regulation, and if we can use other mechanisms, like the EU is doing at the moment, using the European Peace Facility to finance the war in Ukraine, it's possible. So we won't be talking about a European army, we'll be talking about technical battalions like Euro troops. Originally it was between France and Germany. But even if men serving within the Euro troops are still serving under their own national flag, but we can admit these troops take action on behalf of Europe. When they were in Somalia, in Bosnia, they already flew the European flag. Sebastian, it's absolutely true. And we're not starting from scratch. So we're talking about defense, we're talking about war, because at the moment we're faced with a war that we thought we'd never see ever again on our continent, with one country invading another one with their army. But when we talk about Europe of defense, we have to think about threats beyond the threats of one army versus another one. And it was said before, when we talk about disinformation wars to destabilize our democracies, when we talk about cyber attacks, these are almost acts of war. So it means that we need to have a wide range of tools. Of course, today we are very much focused on defense in its most conventional, traditional sense of the word, but at the moment, Europe needs to have a far more sophisticated system in place when you think about all these threats. And I don't think we are acting motivated by emotion only. When we talk about enlarging the EU, we need to be cool-headed, but we are reacting under the threat of a nuclear war, which we could not fathom. Samantha, do you think that some taboos have been eliminated, that there is an awareness like they had in Germany when Olaf Scholz made announcements before the parliament 15 days ago? Things happened over the last 2 weeks, and Europe, or the Europeans, came together and realized that there was an urgent necessity. Yes, quite clearly. Something happened. Of course, something extraordinary happened. And Europe was born on the ruins of a war and will continue building itself after this war. Now the question is, will our previous problems disappear like by magic? Of course not. The East-West relationships, we have to manage them. We tend to forget about them at the moment, but we will have to manage them with the inflow of Ukrainian refugees in Eastern European member states. All the questions of migrations will re-emerge. So what I was saying was, let's be cool-headed, let's remember the difficulties we were faced with before the crisis. We can't erase everything. Just talking about Europe of defense. But there is one thing that seems to be sorted out, is the question of refugees. What seemed to be absolutely impossible a few weeks back became all of a sudden possible within a few days. So Elisa, you worked in the working group on the Dublin Protocol. So tell us about what you did with your working group.
What we did with our working group was restructuring the Dublin Agreement, and it is true what you said, something really special happened over the last weeks and over the last days. But it happened with a really bittersweet taste, because we have to ask ourselves, why didn't it happen before? Why do we really distinguish between refugees that come from Ukraine and refugees that come from Syria, who experienced the exact same? They were let down by their government, they lost their future, they experienced war. We faced them in 2015 and the past 7 years with violence, with racism and disgrace. Italy re-announced the last days that they will welcome 1 million Ukrainian refugees. And I was just asking myself, why now? Why didn't we do that before? We lost lives, we lost futures. So I wanted to ask you, where does this distinguishment come from? And why do we glorify this welcoming of migrants? Because this should have been done years before, not only now.
Luis Quintana, merci. Qu'est-ce que ça vous inspire, ce que l'Europe a démontré en l'espace de quelques jours, alors même que
what Europe demonstrated in a few days when the political campaign in France was showing that we had candidates who were suggesting to build walls and that these walls against migrants would be funded on European funds. Does it mean that there are good migrants and bad migrants? What do you think? Well, I think that for some candidates, yeah, there are good migrants and bad migrants. For certain candidates or certain European heads of states. Yeah, you're right. But in terms of value, okay, let's rewind. Remember that even the Pope is probably one of the very last symbols talking about the need to welcome, to host a human being, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of their religion. His first pontifical trip was to the island of Lampedusa. But why is it that Europe became a fortress? Well, yeah, but it's closer to us. Ukraine is closer. They look like us physically. Whether we like it or not, that's the way it goes. And as Elisa was saying, it's not that it comes too late, but it's not new, but it's closer. It's 3 hours away from Paris, not 6 hours like Syria. And I think it touches us more. Okay, quick poll amongst you here. Elisa, I'll give you the floor in a minute, but would you say that Europe turned away from its values? Who would agree saying that Europe forgot about its values? I love it because some of them... Before when? Before last week. Okay, we don't have a consensus. Elisa?
Yeah, I really just don't know what to say to that statement, because you can't distinguish between people if they're good or bad by the place we're born. We didn't do anything to be born in Europe. They didn't do anything to be born in another place. So to put worth on a person just because of the place they're born and then to decide about the future by that is really hypocritical. And then to preach something about European solidarity into the public, that is hypocrisy. So no, you can't distinguish between good and bad people. And I worked with these people. They are doctors, they are lawyers. And despite what they do, they are human beings which deserve a future and maybe didn't have one, not because of them, but because of a government that let them down, because of a military that invaded their country. So what is happening now in Europe is too late. And the distinguishment that we're doing between the refugees has to stop. It shows that whether we are capable of welcoming these people, and that is what we have to do.
Qu'est-ce que ça vous inspire, Samantha Besson? Vous êtes, je disais, spécialiste des questions de droits humains.
In human rights matters. So here, the auditorium agrees that there's no good or bad migrant, that human life is everywhere the same, and that we should be able to show solidarity and welcome people into our countries. What does this tell us about what's been going on, about how Europe has been built over the last 20 years? Because this migrant issue is nothing new. What can you tell us about that as a legal expert in this field? Well, I liked the proposal very much that was made by that particular group going to the matter of migration. A bulk of what was proposed by that group is actually part of the law that was put forward by the Commission in 2020. And that has now got bogged down, quite simply. And this conflict may be the spark to reawaken that migratory approach that's called Pact for Migration Management. Unfortunately, the title is disastrous, just like migratory flows. Well, exactly, or that entire lexical field is awful, but the fact is that there has been a regulation that was readied and is providing for a principle of solidarity and really covers a huge amount that was put forward a moment ago by the group itself. Now, what's being applied to the refugees, fortunately now they're called refugees and not migrants, but what's being applied now to Ukrainian refugees is is a state of emergency mechanism that's been around for the last 20 years. We're just applying a directive. That's right, we're applying that we've already had in our arsenal, that we didn't dare apply thus far. So the good news is what? The good news is that we do have things in the pipeline, that we do have things that we can reach out and apply, and they need to be applied across the board. We also need to remedy this matter in a dignified fashion, and not in the wings, as we've done with this pseudo-agreement with Turkey, which isn't really an agreement a few years back. This is an entire minefield, and this conflict in Ukraine hopefully will remedy that. Sebastian, what do you say about that? Remember the Belarus pictures only a few months ago that we saw on the TV. That's right, we saw the manipulation of refugees to create division within Europe. Now, in the Jacques Delors Institute, we tried to work holistically on migration, not only on Asia, however dramatic that may be. Unfortunately, it's our feeling that in Europe, the only way to be able to enter into this debate, or even enter into Europe, is for asylum seeking or joining a member of your family. But what about legal migration? For labour purposes, we need labour. We've got shortages, we've got an ageing population, we've got very acute problems. So this question, unfortunately, in Europe, very often it falls in the lap of the Interior Ministry, whereas it's a much broader question. Social affairs, foreign ministry, education, employment. And so I think here, okay, we might be reacting as a knee-jerk emotional reaction, but I think it's good that Europe is now opening its arms, and I think we understand that there's an issue about the proximity between Ukraine and Poland being attacked by the Russian state. No doubt the Polish, as you could understand, are showing a certain amount of solidarity to their immediate neighbour. And I'm not criticising that, far from it. But over and beyond that, once this emotion has gone by, of course this is going to last a long time, we have to see to what extent we're able to sustain this feeling over the long term, and to see possibly whether this mindset, as it changes, will be able to grapple with this matter in its full complexity. Anything you'd like to add?
Yes. I totally agree with you, Elisa. That was a good statement. And I totally disagree with the statement of you, unfortunately. I think the approach of distinguishing between humans from Ukraine or Syria is a false one. The things that have been done or have not been done in the past cannot be undone. The lives of those people have been destroyed. But what we can do now is learn from the past, look in the future, look to a bright future, and have a diverse and valuable Europe.
Oui. Elisa, vous voulez ajouter quelque chose?
You wanted to add something?
Yeah, just really quick. I know we're here today to have a debate and discuss with experts, but there are also politicians in this room. And it is really a topic that I want to convey from my heart. Please take action, not only towards the refugees from Ukraine, but there will be a lot of refugees because of the climate crisis. And I beg you to welcome them in another way that we welcomed the refugees in 2015 and the following 7 years.
Louis, vous aurez le mot de la fin pour conclure
Reese,
cette
perhaps to round off on this sequence on the matter of Europe in the world and European solidarity, a final word? Yes, I mean, I'm not a legal expert. At the end of the day, I'm a biologist and I look at human genomics. But to look at diversity, look at migration, to look at migratory flows or migrants. I mean, some of these words you say are bothersome, but they don't bother me because Europe, at the end of the day, right from its outset, since human beings have come into European territory, there's been a constant migratory flow. That's what it's boiled down to. And Europeans, Europeans here, I think we need to calm down about all these words, about what needs to be said and what shouldn't be said. I think we need to focus on substance rather than format, and the fact that Europe is a continent where it's part and parcel of its history. Migration, constant migration. Refugees, that's something altogether different, but migration per se, it's. I think everybody would agree with you on that point. Samantha, you wanted to add something, is that right? Yes, before we round off our discussion for this first proposal, I must say that I like very much the interregional proposal. We haven't talked about that, hasn't cropped up in our discussion thus far, but it would have been interesting for me to know what the other three proposals of the group did about this interregional dimension. The person who presented it earlier on said that it applied to the other proposals, but what I'd like to have known is what would you have done with that? Unfortunately, we don't have time, but it was very interesting. All right, well, we'll have an opportunity to extend this conversation after this sequence. Anyway, thanks very much. And I'd like them to have a round of applause, in fact.
Diana, Elisa
and Matthias.
Bravo à tous les trois.
Well done to all three of you.
Là, nous passons,
all right, now we're moving on to another working group,
fait un focus sur les
which
libertés et
has
les
looked
droits
at
des citoyens,
freedoms and citizen rights. Here we have Ergis, is that right? Maria Francesca and Esther.
L'un après l'autre, est-ce que vous pouvez nous expliquer
now, can you tell us what prompted you to work on this particular matter? Yes, would you like to start?
So I will talk in English, of course. Well, Madam the Moderator, a very interesting time that we live in. We have a landslide in politics, where we see that there are being created new rules in international politics, and where in the past centuries, democracies and the Western world won. Now we are replaying the game, and I'm not sure if we will win. And there are two causes for that. First of all, we see that we are still using democracies as they were used centuries ago. They are not updated. Why? Because there are new players in the game. We have social media platforms, and we don't know until this date what we will do about it. Second of all, and that's also a very big problem, we see that citizens of the Western world are not defending their own democracies. And as Her Excellency, Madam Secretary Al-Hariri said, we need to be engaged in democracies because authoritarian regimes are like lions. They can defend themselves. But democracies, they need to be defended by its citizens. And therefore, we worked with our group, with our fantastic and talented young people, on how social media platforms, what their position is within the freedom of expression.
Merci beaucoup, Ergis. Je rappelle que vous êtes belge et vous avez 23 ans.
So you're Belgian and you're 23. I remind the audience. Maria Francesca, you're 24, and you are part of the working group which sought to combat menstrual precarity.
Yes, I think it's a subject that we are not talking about publicly enough because human rights has to take over about dignity of human beings, and you have to take every process of your body as being natural. And we are talking about period poverty, we are talking about young females that come from disadvantaged areas, for example, rural areas, isolated areas, we talk about refugee camps, and unfortunately, they do not have the financial support they need to access for their health. And I will give the example of what's happening now at the border with Romania, with the Ukrainian people. Young females are provided hygienic products because they need to protect themselves, because we need to assure a health standard. And this is the reason why we are proposing this, because we still have young females and families that are using improvised health products to, in order to help them secure their menstruation period. And not talking about products, we are talking about policy making, and we are talking about how they can feel themselves, how can we grow confidence in themselves, and how can we assure them that this is normal, everything is normal. How can we normalize this aspect? Okay, so we are providing products, we aim to provide products in public educational places such as schools, high schools, and university, because we see them, young people there, they are on this environment, and we have them and we can support them. But there are people living in isolated areas that are helped only by NGOs. So let's collaborate with the civil society that is already doing this, and some governments are also implementing this, and help them, help the girl to start to have a healthy start in their mature life. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Maria Francesca.
Thank you very much.
Esther,
Esther,
vous avez 24 ans, vous venez d'Autriche, et vous avez
24, you come from Austria, and you
dans le
worked
groupe de travail
on the working group
qui s'est
devoted
attaqué aux
to
violences fondées sur le genre.
gender-based violence.
That's right. First of all, thank you so very much for the invitation. I think it's a great opportunity. And, you know, when you talk about gender-based violence, the thing is that most people, when you think about it, only have in their minds, okay, this might be physical violence, this might be mental violence. But as my colleague Saskia has already said, there are so many different dimensions to gender-based violence, also in the cyberspace, which is not talked about enough. And if I may refer to what my colleagues have already said, for instance, Maria Francesca here, she just talked about the lack of menstrual products and their availability. We could say, well, that is gender-based violence because there is a deprivation going on, which specifically affects women and girls and teenagers. When we go back to the proposal of Rocío, for instance, where we simply see that there are still gender issues which are connected also in the field of, well, again, period products. And then the last point that I might touch upon, because you also asked, okay, why am I within that group? Several scholars from my field, so that would be cultural studies, propose that we live in a sort of post-feminist society. And what that means is that people often don't acknowledge publicly that there is still a need for feminism, that there is still a need for queer studies also. And what that does, of course, is that it takes away the power from the women who have experienced gender-based violence, who've been victims of that, because they are not given a platform, they're not given a voice. So that was very important to us to have a concrete directive where you can actually do something about it and acknowledge the problem. Because, and if you let me finish with that, following the words of Kimberly Crenshaw, who has worked in intersectional feminism, you cannot combat a problem that you do not acknowledge.
Merci beaucoup. Merci Esther.
Thank you very much, Esther.
Alors là, ce qui est intéressant, c'est que finalement,
Okay, so what's interesting now is that we are talking about the issue of gender. We're not going to talk again about the Me Too movement, which raised awareness and which help people from moving from we hear to we listen. But this issue of gender and the way we talk on social media, these are new challenges, but the question is whether our institutions, because we do need a legal framework, but we also need to help NGOs in the field already doing the job. So how can we set up this legal framework and make sure that these issues are addressed at European level? May I start? Go ahead. Well, first, I'd like to thank this working group that worked on menstrual precariousness, because that's something that we don't talk about, and it's a major issue. When you talk about precarity, you talk about energy precarity, for instance, and when you reach the European level, many would say, come on, is this within the remit of Europe? I remember there were many debates when we were negotiating the European budget, and many people said, come on, fighting against poverty is not within the scope of the EU, it's within the scope of national governments. So, first step, we need to understand that there are things that need to be done at European level, at least having the same tools so that we can measure the same things in the same way, sharing good practices, organizing prevention action in a collective fashion. There's a lot to do. Ursula von der Leyen talks about violence against women, and in her State of the Union address, she ranked it as one of her top priority. So there will be European awareness because it's very pregnant in many countries. But there again, these are not the exclusive competence of the EU. It's not even part of the shared competence of the EU. So the Europe has to show what is its added value to be accepted in the debate. On certain topics like defense, I think it's been accepted, but on this topic there is still a long way to go. Samantha, would you agree that there is still a long way to go for this awareness that action must be taken at European level? Well, from a personal perspective, I congratulate you for these 4 proposed actions. They're very important. We call this night Rebuilding Together. It's no longer on the screen, but I'd like to remind us of that, because Europe is not just the EU, it's also the Council of Europe, which includes Russia, Ukraine. It's a large family, and we don't talk about it very much at the moment. But the Council of Europe is about democracy, about human rights. And many proposals made by this working group are within the competence of the Council of Europe. Women's rights, Istanbul Convention, many things. So what touched me, but also concerned me, is that today we may be reinventing the wheel, asking the EU to do things which are done very well at the level of the European Council. And maybe all we need to do is strengthen the Council and help it protect rights that it knows how to protect. Because the EU Court of Justice is not necessarily the ideal venue to hear cases in the field of fundamental rights. Second thing, and that was touched upon in the discussions we had, is that there are many sensitivities when it comes to gender issues, and we know that we have an East-West problem there. And the ratification of this Istanbul Convention by the EU is bogged down by this East-West division. And the Istanbul Convention is hindered by this non-ratification. So that's a major issue, and we have to address it. This is certainly something that you worked on within your working group. But there again, I'm saying we should not forget about the problems we had before the current crisis.
Could I just
Esther.
reply to that? Because you mentioned the Istanbul Convention, and the problem that I see with that is that, yes, the majority of EU member states have signed the Istanbul Convention, but not all of them. So how can we say, as a united Europe, that we stand behind the Istanbul Convention if not everybody has signed it? And the next problem is that, yes, we do have certain directives, and we also have a sensibility towards women's issues. We have directives that focus on victims' rights. But what I don't see, and what our group did not see, was a kind of not reactionary policymaking and lawmaking and directive position, but one that strives to prevent these issues from happening. Because what I see, what our group sees, is that, okay, once gender-based violence has happened, there is a possibility of actually, taking that to court and of seeking justice. But what is the European Union doing in order to prevent these things from happening in the first place? Because I don't see that happening.
Oui, donc j'aimerais dire sur votre première réponse.
Well, for your first answer, I think there is a misunderstanding. Of course, I want all countries to ratify, and we know what's blocking this, and that's very regrettable. But what I'm saying is that we have to understand the reasons behind these blocking issues, and we have to address that and sort out the problem. And how do we do that? Do you have a magic wand? No, but we have to show respect to historical differences. At the beginning of this evening, we said we reunified the European family. But was it ever united? Are we really reunifying people? Well, we're united in a diversity. Okay, but have we spoken about our different constitutional past? There are many things we can address through respect, and maybe in the EU we've not been respectful of our very different pasts. Now, to talk about your second issue, which is about prevention, I agree with you, that's key. And this is why we need the convention, the Istanbul Convention, to be ratified, because then we can ask member states to comply with the prevention obligations, because I do agree with you, it's vital. Okay, yeah, Esther.
Just one last thing, because I'm sorry, but I'm passionate about it, and I see your point to a certain extent, but what is problematic is you mentioned the historical backgrounds and that we should have respect towards each other, and I'm with you on that one, but that respect that we carry towards other countries and their histories should not stop us from actually doing things to protect EU citizens. And when it comes to the Istanbul Convention, several member states did not sign it because it contained the word gender, and because they still have not recognized that there is a difference between sex and gender. And personally, that is not only 30 years behind, but it also completely ignores the identities of millions and millions of Europeans, and that is simply not acceptable.
Mais, dans quelle mesure peut-on imposer cette lecture?
But how can we impose this to countries that have refused it so far? I fully agree with what our colleague just said, but when we worked and negotiated the Istanbul Convention, maybe we should have separated the different elements to anticipate this resistance to the word gender and have different packages within the convention to improve the possibility for different countries to ratify the convention, because at the end of the day, it's all women who can't benefit the protection of this convention because of this obstacle, and that's a tragedy. And it's a good example for all of you, because I hope you will all be in a position to negotiate European treaties on behalf of your government, or maybe you'll be working with the EU or with the Council of Europe. So when you negotiate a treaty, these are issues that need to be anticipated, and in my mind, they've not been anticipated enough. The working group that worked on the right of response on social media, the last one, Sebastian, This question is deeply rooted in our democracy, regulating social media. Well, for that, the European level is certainly the most relevant one. We have two regulations being debated, DMA and DSA, that address the issues of illegal content and regulation against
l'incitation à la haine et autres qui doivent effectivement être régulés. On peut
hate crimes and pedophilia, etc., etc. So that's where Europe has a role to play. And as a standard issuing body, it can play its role. And that's probably the difference between us and the rest of the world in the way we regulate all this as compared to other countries in the world. And we know that it's a top priority of the French presidency to get these two texts adopted. We know that there is a lot of lobbying going on, but I think it's the beginning of a response. I'm thinking about what was done for the General Directive on Data Privacy, which then was adopted as an example by many other countries in the world. So there is the European way of addressing these issues while observing the rights of individuals. Yes. How inspiring is it to see that democracy and gender issues are priorities for this young generation? Well, that's crucial. That's essential. It would be concerning if that wasn't part of the concerns of younger generation. And all these issues around LGBTQ people are crucial. Thank you. Thank you for putting this back on the agenda. It gives me hope. Yes, but we also see that it's up to the European continent to establish a series of values that can then be exported because they can be desirable in other countries. Is that a challenge? Yeah, yes. But look, at global level, Europe is one of the areas in the world that shines most for social inclusion, for diversity, for respect. But that's a never-ending combat. We have to remember that every day. Well, thank you, Ergis, Maya, Francesca, and Esther. Thank you for this moment and for sharing with us. And we are going to start talking about the last challenge you talked about. You talked about environmental issues, and we know how crucial these questions are for people aged under 30 with Christina, Maya, and Nadia. Christina, you come from Cyprus, you're 22, and you worked on this idea of a European network for European marine protected areas. Why did you study this, and how did you work?
Hello, everyone. So my bachelor's degree is in biological sciences, and I aspire to follow a career in the marine life, marine conservation, because I think that it's one of the outermost important things at the moment, because we talk a lot about climate change. We don't talk a lot about biodiversity. And when it comes to our oceans, I would say that biodiversity in the oceans is what provides its resilience. It's like the backbone that supports the entire system. And it's not that I believe it, it's a scientific fact that our oceans can help us fight climate change. And by supporting that, we ensure our sustainable future and our world. So I think it's extremely important.
Merci beaucoup, Christina. Maya, vous
Thank
êtes
you so
finlandaise,
much,
vous avez 23
Christina.
ans et
Maya,
vous avez
you're from
travaillé
Finland,
sur
you're
la nécessité
23, and
d'établir
you
des
worked
budgets
on the need
climatiques
to
pour
have
les villes.
climate budget for cities.
Yes, bonjour, je m'appelle Maija Kuivalainen, I'm 23 years old, youth climate delegate of Finland for the years 2021 and 2022, and I'm also a city councillor. So that's why I chose the group of environment and cities especially. And why our subgroup cities chose this idea of climate budget is that we are facing the biggest threat of that modern humans have ever faced, climate change. It's a crisis multiplier. As Elisa said, refugee crisis, water crisis, war crisis, many crises. But we can solve it. I believe in us. Je crois en nous. And I would like to challenge you, every one of us, to think just for a moment about Europe in 2050. As Monsieur Thomas Römer said, youth imaginary is needed. Not only, all of us imaginary is needed. Now we need to work backwards to identify policies and programs that will connect that specified future, our visions, to the present. In EU, we have the common target to cut the emissions 55% by 2030. So we have 8 years. EU cities need to act and do their part on this common global challenge, on this common target. Locals make it global. Members make it union. Cooperation makes it success. Everything starts with money, as we know. So we need a science-based climate budget to all EU cities. So let's do it, EU.
Thank you. Thank you, Maya. Nadia, vous avez 22 ans. Vous êtes
Nadia, you're 22, you're from Denmark, and you worked on this proposal to develop agrivoltaic initiatives.
Yes, that was what we worked on. And first of all, we really just chose energy. And the reason why we think that energy policies are so important is because according to the World Resource Institute, then 73% of global emissions are related to the energy sector, and especially fossil fuels. And then secondly, talking about the war in Ukraine, we have to keep in mind that energy policies is really also security policies, and currently we are directly or indirectly, supporting the war by funding and buying Russian oil and gas. And talking about that, then we focused on solar panels especially, and how to, scale up the build out of it. And then we thought that, of course, we also come into the fact that we have agriculture. And then it makes sense to kind of try to combine the use of agriculture and energy production. And that is really important because land is what we do not have enough of. So if we can combine certain sectors and work with solving multiple problems at the same time, I think that we can truly get to a sustainable world.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Nadia. Sébastien, il y a des propositions extrêmement pratico-pratiques.
They're very tangible, hands-on proposals that can be implemented pretty quickly if you've got the resources. Well, in the think tank, having an idea such as that, you would all recruit them. Well, yeah, look, there's lots to do, and I was very impressed, I must say, not only by the power of conviction of these young people, but also the accuracy of what they said, and their ideas that were very, very hands-on and very telling. So I think there's something to work on here. But I was also very touched by this marine space, protected area idea, because obviously you have to think about Europe, which has one of the biggest seaboards in the world, Baltic Sea, North Sea, Atlantic. You're never far away from the sea when you're in Europe, which is just self-evident. The sea encroaches into the European space quite considerably. So we have that proximity with the sea. And in France, this is something that is really telling for us. We have lots of seaboards. A quarter of French waters, in inverted commas, are protected sea areas. Now, there is a French network of protected areas, but the maritime borders per se, well, I suppose there's matter here for having a European network. There is a European fishing policy, and obviously this involves fighting against overfisheries, and this is decided at European level every year. So, of course, we need to reconcile that with protecting these maritime areas and have a European network offering a safeguard for those marine areas would be a very valuable idea. I'd also like to pay tribute to the idea of drawing more young people into the farming world. I think that's also an idea. I didn't expect to hear that, actually, I must say. But today, young people are looking for more meaningfulness in their work. They don't want to do just silly jobs. Meaningless jobs. And so farming today, particularly with the energy needs and feeding everybody, food security, I think there, with the right financial encouragements, financial incentives, and we know it's a problem in our countryside. We need to have young blood to have the next generation of European farmers. Yeah, what's of interest is this need to look at the climate problem linked in with the Ukrainian crisis. And this energy idea, this transition idea, is also something which is linked to what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, and this reliance that some European countries have more than us in relation to Russia. So unwinding out of fossil fuels, and I think the idea actually is fabulous. Maya mentioned it a moment ago. Climatic budgets for municipalities. Can that be a way to go to have this transition affected in a grassroots level? Yes, I thought also that was an excellent proposal. I really did. And I liked very much the fact that the interregional perspective that we heard from in the third group would also apply here to the environmental sphere, either in respect of these maritime areas or no. And I think this should be developed in all the projects, interregional, national, but also between regional areas and other areas of Europe. And I think that echoed very, very deeply. Also, what I thought was great in these four proposals was the fact that we can see cities and the countryside. And so I was just wondering, amongst you, did you talk about that? In the EU, how can you get across this land versus city divide? How do you grapple with that contrasted, that contrast, and that your proposal on farming and countryside and maybe farming in a city and cities, how does that all fit together rather than pitting themselves one against the other? Because at the end of the day, this is all part and parcel of our future, isn't it? Nadia, would you like to pick up on that?
Sure, I think one of the really important things is that we need young people to meet across, like young people from rural areas and young people from the cities, and also people who are maybe not that young anymore. They need to meet because then they're finding solution that works for all of us. And myself, for example, I live in a city, and we were proposing something that was related to agriculture, and it almost didn't feel like we could do that without including young farmers. So that was really something that I did also back home in my home country, Denmark, where I reached out to the organization of young farmers to hear, so what do you think about this? What barriers do they see? And they were afraid of maybe looking into losing subsidies from EU, and they also saw some regulatory barriers. So that is really what we need. We need young people to meet And I know that this sounds like something that everybody can agree on, but we are just currently not seeing that people meet that much.
Elisa.
Francesca.
No, Francesca, pardon.
So I wanted just to construct on the idea of my colleague that we need participation for young people, and we also need quality places to work for young people that can combine environment, social inclusion, quality of life, and so on and so forth. But unfortunately, these standards are a little bit postponed. We do not know how to define quality labor work. We do not know how to define quality labor market, and it will become difficult and difficult to do this because youth has to be supported. And moreover, I would like to draw the attention that as during French presidency to the Council of EU, you are able to make a change within this because you have two important objectives on the youth agenda, social inclusion and a greener Europe. So you can further develop on quality labor market for the future.
Maya.
Yes, thank you. Farmers play a key role in solving all these eco-crises like climate change, and as Christina very greatly said, that it's not only about climate, it's about biodiversity as well. So they need to be supported, and we also talk about this in our cities group about climate budget. There are rural areas belonging to the cities as well, so they need to be taken in account, and that's very important. So yeah, we talk about them, and it's not only about the cities. Not in the rural areas, people can't just, stop using their cars and go 40 kilometers to work by feet or by bike. It's not possible, at least in Finland. If we have winter, it's very cold, for example. So yeah, we need to see the whole picture when we are talking about climate budgets, for example. And farmers, people in rural areas, they also own a lot of forest, usually, at least in Finland. So they really play a key role, for example, when we need to increase the level of our carbon sinks, like forests.
Merci beaucoup. Merci à toutes les trois. Est-ce que Samantha, qu'est-ce que ça vous inspire?
Samantha, what do you think? And everything that's just been said, I suppose we can say that if we let them take over, we could do this transition pretty quickly because there's such a political willpower among these young people that, perhaps we'd get less bogged down in questions and they'd affect the change radically, but quickly. So shouldn't we adopt their approach? From your position, what do you think about the EU in respect of this and also the multilateral organizations? Should they go faster? Well, it's a big question. Perhaps two comments first. It's great to talk about cities because cities, at the end of the day, it is an institution that can go against the state. Global cities for climate, global cities for women, global cities for poverty. Cities today, they are part and parcel of these major considerations, and they can break this institutional framework when institutions are going too slowly. It's true also for the EU, and it holds true for a state, and also states dotted around the world. So I think the proposal was almost too modest, in fact, talking about budgets, because you could do much more than that with European cities, and we've done a number of things. Paris, Barcelona, I think Milan as well is involved in some sort of process. I think a huge amount of inroads have already been made. Now, the second point I'd like to make, it's great to hear you this evening. You give us lots of hope in what we do, and we're going to support you to the best of our efforts. But we started our discussion earlier on by talking about what people we hear but don't listen to, but there are also people we never hear. 90% of people who are not necessarily going to go to university, don't speak English, that don't move around the EU. And for them, the EU is something very remote. So I think it's crucial to build that dialogue, build that conversation within each member state by going to these young people, whoever they are, even if they don't necessarily come in and of themselves, towards us. Now, I think you'll say that perhaps you'll accuse me of being a Swiss. I know that I'm in a country with lots of countryside. In a country where we talk a lot amongst ourselves. But I think it's important, irrespective of whether you're Swiss or not. Now, in this Collège de France, a fabulous forum going broader to other horizons, people who haven't been lucky enough to go to university or enjoy an Erasmus program. What can you tell me about that, about these profound inequalities, about those people who are included, who talk about Europe, and those, at the end of the day, who are so far away from it that, it doesn't matter not going further down the road because they'll never be hit by the EU?
Yeah, if I could add something to that. I think the question you raised, it touches the very soul of our democracy. That's the biggest problem, because not engaging is also not having a democracy. But the thing is, we as young people, and all young people that are very intelligent and engaged in this program and all over Europe, we need to be the ambassador of our democracy. And maybe our fellow youngsters are not interested in politics, but we are. And if we are the ambassadors, and if we can share our passion with our fellow youngsters, we can also convince them by sharing their opinion, how little it may be, or how not profound it may be, it doesn't matter. We can translate them. And just one call, because there are a lot of policymakers also present today. We are past, as a generation, my generation, we are past the phase of asking kindly to join or to give us a seat at the table. We are past the phase where we are demanding you to join, to give us a seat at the table. Now we are at the phase where we as a generation are begging you, please include us in decision making, because climate change, migration, democracy, we will handle them, and we believe that we have good ideas. But we need a seat at the table.
Maria Francesca.
Maria Francesca.
To build upon the right of participation for young people, but also for youth organization and for civil society as such, because we are not realizing how much young people have mobilized during pandemic, like have volunteering, they have interfered in their community to help one another, and they are also helping with the Ukrainian crisis, student organization, youth organization, and civil society as a whole. So we need more than a place to participate. We need to be considered as equal in the process of implementing decisions, because NGOs and civil society can reach places that the government cannot reach, isolated areas, rural areas, areas that are difficult to access and to work with. And government can ensure the strategy, can ensure the funding, and they can further coordinate. So it's more than just having the right to participate, it's the right to being equal at the decision-making table and to provide further not only strategy, but actually action plans that can be implemented directly in the community with everyone.
Esther?
First of all, I very much appreciate the fact that you mentioned the people who are not here, because there's a lot of people who are not here, and mostly those are marginalized people. So those are women of color, those are women with disabilities. That is the queer community, for instance. And as my colleague said, they do not only not have a place at the table, but they're also not treated equally. So I'm thinking back, for instance, and this is interesting because we see a quite intersectional angle on that, because it affects gender, it affects sexual orientation, and it directly affects climate change and huge decisions that we as Europe face. Thinking back to COP26, for instance, there was a question of, okay, how do we include indigenous communities? How do we include indigenous female communities also, because they are disproportionately affected by climate change? Well, it was mentioned that, for instance, when in the areas where there are mostly indigenous people, biodiversity is protected, and yet they're not being listened to. So it's not only about having a place at the table, but it's about those who are in the decision-making powers to listen to them and to include them in the committees, because the higher up you go, the fewer of these marginalized people and groups you will find.
Thank you. Diana.
Diana?
Très rapidement, j'aimerais juste rappeler
I'd just like to remind you what was said in respect of the ALMA program. It's a sort of an Erasmus program for young people in a professional environment, maybe, and for people who not necessarily familiar with the EU, and to create this sentiment of belonging to the EU that we are lucky enough to belong to. I think the EU is mindful of this. I think we need to start, stop talking and convince and convince those who are already convinced. That's important, but things are already set up, and hopefully we'll be able to address ourselves to these other people. Thank you very much.
We heard a lot, but unfortunately we have to put an end to this debate. So what do you think about this more inclusive Europe, a Europe that would give more room to these young people who will have to live with the consequences of the decisions that older people are making now? So everything shows that we need to turn the table. We need to change things and walk out of our daily routine. We need to rethink our practices, the way we do things. We need to find a way to allow everyone to do what they have to do. Well, at the Jacques Delors Institute, we've been working with young people aged 25 to 30. We have an academy each year with 60 of them, and we debate around ideas. So what we're doing tonight is what we do on a daily basis, and that's very stimulating. Now, young people are not the only ones having ideas, but it's very interesting working with them. And I was very interested in what was said at the end, how we can include all territories, because we've seen that in many of our democracies there is a great divide between cities and the countryside. That was very clear in the UK with the Brexit vote, for instance. So at the Jacques Delors Institute, we advocate for all young people to benefit from one European mobility as of the age of 16. We were very much in favor of an Erasmus program for young people going through vocational training. So if all young Europeans benefit by a European mobility at the age of 16, we will be doing a lot already. What do you think? Well, it's very inspiring, but we need to go one step further, because once again, in this room, we have the elite, and we need a better representation of diversity. Europe is not just a Europe of white, heterosexual males. Go to any city, London, Berlin, Paris, you have lots of colours, and we don't have many colours here on this panel. Yeah, let's try and achieve a more diverse, inclusive Europe. Samantha, you have the final say. No, all I want to say that it's very touching to me to see that in 2022 we have all these young people asking for more Europe and not asking for less Europe. And asking for more Europe is good by my standards. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you all. Diana, Elisa, Matthias, Ergis, Francesca, Nadia, Christina, Esther, Maya, thank you so much for this conversation. You gave us hope. You showed us a way. Of course, we'll have to talk about this further, and this conversation needs to be held in all neighborhoods, in all cities, everywhere in Europe. A round of applause for our guests on this panel.
Merci Samantha Besson.
Thank you, Samantha, Luis Quintana, and Sebastian Maya for being with us and debating with young people. Before I hand over to Eva Nguyen-Bin, the chairperson of the Institut Français, the French Institute, I apologize for us running so late, but this was a fascinating debate organized by the French Institute, Collège de France, ARTE, Institut Jacques Delors. Of course, this was the European Night of Ideas, but ideas will continue to grow and be shared, and conversation will not stop, should not stop. It's all an issue of democracy, and it's all about turning Europe into a far-ranging democratic territory that reaches out to more than the lucky ones that were in this room tonight. Thank you. Over to you, Eva Nguyen Bin. Please.
Pardon, est-ce que ça marche? Oui.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Bonsoir à tous et à toutes.
I was checking my mic. So good evening to all of you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you. We, as the French Institute, along with ARTE, the Jacques Delors Institute, and the Collège de France, we are so honored having organized this evening, and we believe that the questions raised tonight will continue to be discussed. I count on you, and please use your social media. And now I'll ask the 50 young persons who worked on this to come on stage. I will ask them all to come on stage.
Everyone who has been working, and I know you've been working very hard for the last few days, last few months, please come on stage. I would like to conclude on this, that our Minister for Europe and External Affairs has talked about audacity. Our State Secretary has said, get involved for our democracy, and you, the young people, you have said, what are you waiting for? This is the message that you told us. What are you waiting for? And this gave me a lot of hope. And I would like to finish on this note of hope. But please, I will ask everyone to stay a bit silent, please, for a few seconds. Sorry, I know it's late. But when we talk about hope, I would like to finish on Ukraine. And I would like to have a moment of solidarity and thought for Ukraine. And I would like us to listen to the national anthem of Ukraine, if you agree. And I would like everyone in the room to stand up. And I hope that the technical and logistics have managed this, but we will now listen to the national anthem of Ukraine.
Згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці, запануємо ми, браття, у своїй сторонці, душу й тіло ми положим за
Merci à vous. Merci. Merci à tous et à toutes. Once
thank
again,
you.
I'm very, very proud that we managed this with you, thanks to you, and you were so good that I'm sure that we will contact you again. Thank you very much. Merci à tous et à toutes d'avoir été avec nous.
Thank you all for being with us tonight.